On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 1.
Good afternoon, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The RAC says it's a truly dark day for drivers as the cost of filling an average family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. The average cost of a litre of petrol has risen to £1.82. For diesel, a litre is now £1.88. While former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith has told us the world's over-reliance on Russian oil and gas is partly to blame.
We and other countries over the last number of governments decided that it didn't matter and we could just buy energy from anywhere, and we stopped producing our own energy. We're sitting on North Sea oil and gas, and we also have shale gas reserves here in the UK. So it's time for us to start thinking seriously about even going for net zero. You're going to need gas well into past that. We've got to start producing our own.
A lake in Devon remains closed until further notice as police continue to search for two people who went missing after a boat capsized. Two other people were rescued safely from the water at Rodeford Lake yesterday afternoon, and another two were taken to hospital in Plymouth. One has since been discharged, but the other remains in a critical condition. Michael Gove has admitted he doesn't know how many people will take advantage of the government's new housing scheme. In the next few moments, Boris Johnson is set to announce plans for lower-paid workers to be able to use their housing benefits to obtain mortgages. The Levelling Up to Housing Secretaries told Talk TV it was silly to ask about numbers, and his Labour counterpart says the plan hasn't been thought through.
If you're on universal credit, you're not allowed to have more than 16,000 in savings, and the reality is most people don't have any at all. Mortgage lenders will be saying to people, well, where's your deposit? I think the reality is that this will help absolutely nobody at all.
A government review has found the age at which people can legally buy tobacco products in England should rise every year. It's part of government plans to be smoke-free and eradicating smoking by 2030, which would mean less than 5% of the population being smokers. And Prince William has been pictured selling the Big Issue in central London. The future king donned a red seller's vest and a hat in Westminster. Kensington Palace says it's connected to a project for his 40th birthday. That's all for now. We'll have more updates in half an hour.
My show is called The Independent Republic of Mike Graham because it's independent and I'm Mike Graham. But inside of that, it's all about you. It's all about the people that call into the show. It's all about what you care about because we know what ordinary people want to know.
And good afternoon, 0344 499 1000. So this is how it all started.
If you've been a council tenant for at least 3 years, you'll have the right by law to buy your house, and that's that. And you'll be able to buy it at a price that's 1/3 below market value.
Margaret Thatcher's Right to Buy scheme, first announced in the 70s. Today, Boris Johnson wants to replicate this. So, is owning your own house the number-one priority? We'll look at that in a few moments. Also this afternoon, it's our favourite
if you were to
clip.
follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose.
Yeah, well, that's how they used to flog the stuff. Today, things have really changed. The age at which you can start smoking, as you heard there in the news, should be increased according to a new review. It all sounds very noble, but can you really stop grown adults that want to buy something from buying something? That seems extraordinary. The People's Question Time kicks off this afternoon. A panel of 3 of our listeners debating some of the big issues of the day. We're looking forward to that. One of those issues will be that of petrol. The government still say they have your back.
Governments are looking vigilantly at what's happening on the forecourts. If we think that there's any anti-competitive practice going on, there is a watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, that can step in. It's a very tough situation, and of course it's linked, as we all know, to war in Ukraine.
Well, the rising cost of fuel continues to dominate. This week has seen the biggest daily rise in 17 years. We've got our eye on this here on Talk TV throughout the course of the day. We've spotted over £2, over £2 for a litre of unleaded. 2.20 is the highest we've seen for diesel. How much longer, seriously, can that go on for? Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk TV, 0344 499 1000. Now, here's the thing. Is buying a house your number one priority? Just a straightforward question. When you consider all the things that we do, our various ambitions and aspirations, how we want to live, how we want to exist, starting a family, having a nice car, being able to get away on holiday once a year, eating out every now and again, when you consider all the various factors that make us tick along in this thing called life, is top of that list, top, front and centre of that list, is it owning your own house? 0344 499 1000. Of course, back in the day, and remember, we're talking in the last few decades, it was very unusual for the average working class person to own their own house. We rented, and we rented from the council. It's quite astonishing for me to think, and I was going through this in my head today, when I think back on my kind of last year at primary school, there was maybe 10%, probably 2 or 3 kids in the class who I think lived in privately owned homes. And everyone else just rented. They lived in a council house. So 10% came from homes that were privately owned. But then, of course, Mrs. Thatcher came along.
If you've been a council tenant for at least 3 years, you'll have the right by law to buy your house, and that's that. And you'll be able to buy it at a price that's 1/3 below market value. The only condition we make is that if you sell it within 5 years, you'll have to return a proportion of any profit you make to the local authority. So here's our third promise. We promise you the right in law to buy your council house at 1/3 below market price.
There it was, and that was the starting pistol on home ownership for that sizable chunk of the population that had never, ever dreamt about becoming a home owner. We can argue forever, by the way, about the rights and the wrongs of sending off council homes. We know the principle was sound, but there were clear implications on not rebuilding more social housing. But that has largely been a problem for successive governments to this very day. No one has really fully addressed that. But the point, and this was the point, was to give the average working man or woman some autonomy, a stake in their own life. What's wrong with that? To own and create a place for your family, to not be reliant on the state, and to be able to see a tangible return on your input. Prior to that, you worked all of your life. You paid all your taxes, and you didn't own a thing. That was the game changer. The Thatcher initiative allowed millions to enjoy a slice of what their middle-class cohorts had had for many years. The working man was set free, but over the years, that option has slightly stagnated. It's grinding to a halt. Those desires and aspirations might be the same, but now it's simply about cost. Buying a house is an impossible dream now for many people, or so we keep being told. Today, Boris Johnson wants to reimagine and enact something similar to the Thatcher scheme. He's speaking this afternoon, in the next few moments, in fact, in Blackpool. He's going to promise to boost home ownership. He's also attempting to repair relations, of course, with Tory MPs who revolted against his leadership, but that's another story. In the speech, we understand Boris Johnson will say he wants to extend the right to buy for people who rent from housing associations, but he will also say, and this is the real game changer, he'll also say that housing benefit could count towards the mortgage. And this is rather new. So let me ask you a couple of questions on the back of this. Is owning your house the ultimate goal in life? Is it your number one priority? 0344 499 1000. Think of all those things you want to do in this short game called life on Earth. Is your number one priority to own your own home? We'll await the fuller details. We know Mr. Johnson is speaking right now in Blackpool. And one of the areas that we understand he's going to cover in all of that is that of housing benefit. Now, of course, housing benefit helps low-income or unemployed people to pay their rent, but it costs the government £30 billion a year. £30 billion a year. A large proportion of that money goes to private landlords. So think about this. The idea is, well, why would you not allow a large proportion of that money to go to paying a mortgage? A person isn't usually eligible for housing benefit if they have a mortgage, and you can't normally get a mortgage if you have housing benefit. The Prime Minister wants to somehow tap in to that situation and allow people to use the benefit as part of the mortgage. Being on a housing benefit doesn't mean you're unemployed, of course. We also don't know how many people this will help or how many people will be entitled to apply. Julia, on Breakfast this morning, tried to get some of that detail out of Michael Gove, but it failed. Let's have a little listen to what the Prime Minister is saying, speaking live now in Blackpool.
Worst pandemic for a century, and once again, we are steering into the wind. We face global pressures on prices caused by the lingering effects of COVID and the shock of Putin's aggression in Ukraine. We'll get through it. We'll get through it. Just as we got through the far greater challenge of COVID and the colossal fall in output that entailed. Our position is far better than during past economic difficulties. People don't face the misery of the 1980s or 1990s of being told in their millions that they were surplus to requirements, there was no job that they could do. We now have unemployment at its lowest level since 1974 and youth unemployment at or near a record low. It's an amazing fact that we now have more job vacancies than there are unemployed workers to fill them. And that in itself is feeding inflationary pressures. I want to talk frankly about what we need to do together so that we come through this period together as fast and as strongly as possible. And the first step is to understand the scale and the causes of the problem. Everyone can see and feel the impact on household budgets, the increases in the cost of food, the spooling digits on the petrol pumps, energy bills growing seemingly ever larger. Much of this has been driven by problems in global supply chains that followed the pandemic, the sudden surge in demand for gas from China, the world shortage of container ships. 6 months ago, there were good reasons to hope that the laws of supply and demand would start to operate and these problems would begin to abate. The world responded, for instance, to the shortage of lorry drivers by hiring more, paying them better and giving them better conditions. That progress was brutally interrupted on the 24th of February when Putin decided on his disastrous and unprovoked war in Ukraine. World markets have responded with a significant spike in prices, partly driven by sanctions, partly by the elevated risk premium, the inevitable increase in what businesses have to charge to compensate.
And, of course, we will bring you all the salient details throughout the course of that speech as well, particularly when it gets onto that issue of home ownership. Is buying a house your number one priority? 0344 499 1000. And can I also throw this in as well? I think this is a rather interesting kind of subsidiary question. There's a big fat urban myth that snakes its way around the place that literally nobody can afford to buy a house, particularly if you're under 30 and if you're not on a, I don't know, a six-figured salary job. Let me ask you this. Have you been able to usurp that stereotype and actually save, put some money aside and get yourself a mortgage to buy your first house? Because there are doomsayers out there that will have you believe that only squillionaires can afford to buy anything, when clearly every day in this country, thousands of mortgages are approved. They're not all rich old duffers. They aren't all people whose jobs pay them a massive salary. Were you able, despite earning a moderate wage and being fairly young, still able to buy a house? 0344 499 1000. That's where you will find us. The wider question, when Boris Johnson talks about extending home ownership, is that for you the number one priority, to own a house? You know, for many, It really isn't. But I think the problem we have now is once upon a time people have gone, do you know what, I don't want that hanging round my neck for 25, 30 years, so I'd rather rent. But, of course, now the cost of renting is so darn expensive that becomes impossible for many people. And you look across the way at somebody who owns a house very similar to the one you rent, and their mortgage is half of your rent. I think, well, that can't be right either. So did you manage to do it and usurp that stereotype and buy your own place? But if you haven't, is that really is that the big aim in life, to own a house? Or are there other things that are more important to you beyond that? Because that, I think, most of us, it used to be the thing, I guess. You know, you left school, you met somebody, you got married, you bought a house. That has changed dramatically. Lots of people, even on reasonable salaries, seem to still be renting. Is that the number one priority in the gig of life? 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. For you, does that sit at the top of the big wish list? And secondly, a supplementary question we're throwing in. Is it, as far as you're concerned, something that, well, you did it, actually. Against all of the headlines that no one can buy one, you actually did it. Our lines are open. This is Talk TV Live from the Talk Radio studios. This one in from Penn, who says, I feel sorry for young people today. I bought my first house in 1985. I was single. I worked in a petrol station. Oddly, we'll come back to that in a second. Imagine somebody working in a petrol station today on their own trying to buy their first house. A fair point. Lucy says, I think we just need to refine the property market so that people on low incomes can afford to either buy or rent, which is exactly what the Prime Minister is supposedly announcing today. We don't have full detail. Michael Gove was put in a kind of a pincer movement of his own making, frankly, with Julia Hartley-Brewer on Breakfast this morning when she tried to say, well, how many people will be entitled to this? How many people are allowed to apply for such a scheme? If you're on some kind of housing benefit, you can transpose that into a mortgage rather than a rental payment to a landlord. So Lucy says, refine the property market so that people on lower incomes can afford to either buy or rent. There has to be another way that doesn't cripple people financially. It's amazing. It's not rocket science, for goodness sake. It isn't rocket science. On that issue, we'll go back to the property question in a second. On that issue of petrol, we've got our eye on this throughout the course of the day here on Talk TV. Let's just bring you what we're seeing so far. I mean, this is extraordinary. BP in Wigan, £2.12.9. £2.12.9 at a BP in Wigan. In Chelsea, we're seeing £2.20. That'll be for diesel. And 202.9 on the M4 in Wiltshire. So they're the kind of prices we are currently seeing with petrol. I'm almost speechless that I could read out £2.20 for a litre of diesel. £2.20. Remember, the government take half of this. Do something, Rishi Sunak. Do something. This alone will not solve the entirety of the cost of living crisis. But man alive, the government are having their own windfall, of course, because every time it goes up, they take a larger slice. Forget Rishi's 5p off duty from back in the spring statement. That's long gone. That went in about 24 hours. That was eaten up by subsequent pay rises, subsequent rises in the cost of the stuff. So what we actually need is a substantial drop, an absolute tangible drop. And we're living in a civilised... We shouldn't be seeing the cost of filling up your car at £2.20 a litre. £2.20, that's got to be the most expensive form of transport, right? 03444991000. So let's go back to it then. We are talking, of course, that issue of attempting to buy your own house. Well, Boris Johnson thinks he might have solved the problem for many people. The PM has announced that lower-paid workers will be able to use housing benefits to buy their home and pay their mortgage. Boris Johnson is arguing in Blackpool that it makes sense to spend the £30 billion that goes on rent to help first-time buyers instead. Labour says he's not thought through the proposals and they would make the housing crisis worse. Is that even possible? Is buying a house your number one priority? Russell Conway is a lawyer specialising in landlord and tenant matters. Russell, good afternoon to you. It is the ultimate conundrum, the Rubik's Cube of modern-day life. How do we solve the housing crisis? We're talking about petrol crisis, energy crisis. The housing one has been with us. It predates all of those other things, and it's becoming more and more of a problem. Boris Johnson thinks he has part of the answer. Do you agree?
Certainly not. I mean, remember when Margaret Thatcher developed this scheme in 1985, she was dealing with local authorities where she could compel them to sell. Housing associations are private companies, private organisations. The government can't make them do anything. Yeah. More importantly, though, since the scheme was introduced, I think nearly 1,900,000 flats have been sold. Only 5%, let me repeat that, only 5% of those properties have been replaced. So there is a huge diminution in the amount of social lettings in this country. And what we need is affordable rented property. What we don't need is a diminution in the social housing stock.
So, absolutely, the issue of rebuilding is something that seems to have spectacularly eluded successive governments, and this one is no exception to that. In terms of access to buying a house, which is another part of the Prime Minister's pledge here. We understand that he'll be announcing throughout this speech in Blackpool the idea that you could hypothecate some of your housing benefit into a mortgage payment. I mean, on paper, that kind of seems to be reasonable. After all, you're giving it to a landlord. Why could it not still go into the kitty bird in the shape of a mortgage?
The problem is that the people who give out the mortgages are the lending companies and the banks. If you're a lending company, you wouldn't have a great deal of appetite for giving a significant mortgage, perhaps in London as much as £80,000 or £90,000, maybe more, to somebody who is on universal credit or income support. It might be suggested that somebody who is on universal credit wouldn't be able to get anything of a deposit together, and would the mortgage company be interested in such a risk? I very much doubt it.
But I guess if it was just about the housing benefit and somebody does go to work and they are, I mean, you're absolutely right. You can almost see the building societies and the banks going, hang on a second, what the heck have you just announced, Prime Minister?
Well, I mean, I think that the mortgage situation is in the hands of the mortgage providers and the lenders. But there are a number of other problems here, legal problems. When people rent properties from housing associations, all the repairs are done by the housing associations. Once they become leaseholders, they have to pay a service charge. A lot of people don't know what service charges are in the social sector. But if you suddenly have to have a lift replaced or a roof replaced, suddenly you get a £25,000 bill. And if you're on modest means, that's very difficult to deal with. Sometimes you have to give the keys back. I get lots of people come to see me in my office who have done the right to buy, thought they had a flat which was theirs for life, and then they have service charges to pay which are far beyond their means. And I think some of the housing associations who may become attracted to this scheme are the very housing associations with a large amount of ageing housing stock that needs repair and maintenance, and they will be looking to take part in this scheme so that the unfortunate people who facilitate the right to buy then have to pay massive service charges in years to come. Yeah,
you kind of wonder what the caveats and the detail will be on that. And, of course, we've got no information yet as to how many people would even be entitled to this and where it would happen. Listen, great to have you on as ever. Russell, thank you. Russell Conway, lawyer specialising in landlord and tenant matters. He's not enamoured with the scheme. By the way, some breaking news. Train drivers on, you know where it's going, train drivers on Hull trains, Greater Anglia and Croydon Tramlink are to stage strikes later this month in separate disputes over pay. This is according to ASLEF. Well, what's going on? Is it the bonkers season for just stopping going to work? You've got civil servants who could go and don't go. You've got train drivers who've decided to strike, tube drivers who've decided to strike. The world's falling apart. You can't get a passport. You can't get a driver. What the hell is going on out there? Petrol is through the roof. What are we meant to do? Bring back the pandemic, I say. It was far simpler, wasn't it? When we just stayed at home and watched Phil and Holly all morning. Good Lord. Thank goodness for Talk TV. We'll keep you updated on everything and all the breaking news. Let's go to Stephen in Manchester on the housing issue. Afternoon to you, Stephen. I understand you're an ex-housing officer, so you probably know a little bit about this. Has the Prime Minister solved the problem?
It's disastrous. I mean, first of all, good afternoon, by the way. First of all, I would like to say it shows that they're intellectually and morally bankrupt. And let me declare my position. I'm a lifelong Conservative supporter. This is not a meaningful Conservative ideology. Number one, many people who are in housing association property. After I retired from the council, I worked with the housing associations, are there because of need. And if you sell off the stock as a point of ideology, it's absent in the future. And also it's harder to administrate if you then sell it off and have to build elsewhere. It's just a continuing chaos. Number two, the thought of the taxpayer, the hard-pressed taxpayer, goodness me, over 50% of our taxes, of fuel price goes on taxes.
Yep.
The thought of these people, myself included, having to support people by them using housing benefit towards their mortgages. It's just an abuse of the taxpayer.
So this, yeah, you're absolutely right on that point. Do you sense, and I'm afraid we haven't got long on this, Stephen, but just in a few words, do you sense this is really about Boris Johnson trying to make amends with those disgruntled backbenchers by coming up with something that's a bit Thatchery?
Oh, it is 100% about survival. It really is. And some will take advantage because they'll have access to family money.
Well, did you say that? But
save more than 16 grand and don't declare it.
But I reckon we will have a situation perhaps where, you know, when the numbers come out, who's entitled to it, it might be very small. Stephen, thank you for that. News headlines next. I'm Ian Collins, and you're watching Talk TV, the home of straight talking. What makes me angry? People who own reptiles make me angry. Why would you own a snake when you live on the 14th floor of a flat in Maidstone? I mean, that's just ridiculous. On a more serious level, what makes me angry? The middle-class intelligentsia, the kind of Guardianista characters that purport to walk in the shoes of ordinary people that actually haven't got a clue what it's really like.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Zora Suleiman. In the last half an hour, Boris Johnson has been speaking from Blackpool, announcing measures to help people get on the property ladder. The Prime Minister made a rallying call for people to come together to get through the cost of living crisis. Under new plans, lower paid workers will be able to use their housing benefits to get mortgages. The RAC says it is a truly dark day for drivers as the cost of filling an average family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. The average cost of a litre of petrol's risen to £1.82. For diesel, a litre's now £1.88. Former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan Smith has told us the world's over-reliance on Russian oil and gas is partly to blame.
We and other countries over the last number of governments decided that it didn't matter and we could just buy energy from anywhere. And we stopped producing our own energy. We're sitting on North Sea oil and gas, and we also have shale gas reserves here in the UK. So it's time for us to start thinking seriously about even going for net zero. You're going to need gas well into past that. We've got to start producing our own.
The Chief of Police in Paris has apologised for tear-gassing Liverpool fans at the Champions League final. Didier Lament admitted it was a failure, but said he had no other option. Thousands of fans with tickets were unable to get into the stadium for the match against Real Madrid. And Prince William has been pictured selling the big issue in central London. The future king donned a red seller's vest and hat in Westminster. Kensington Palace says it's connected to a project for his 40th birthday. Well, that's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
This in from Steve in Bromsgrove says, sounds to me like the government are implementing a new subprime mortgage problem down the track, replication of the US Clinton policy that eventually led to the banking crisis in 2008. Lessons not learned. The more I think about it, the more this is clearly a policy that is aimed more at backbenchers in the Conservative Party than it's aimed at wannabe homeowners. And there may well be some people, like any scheme, that do benefit from it, and people will sing from the rafters and say it was the only way it could happen, and it was a great idea. We pay at the moment 30 billion quid in housing benefit, and often that is just simply passed on to a private landlord. Is there no way that somebody is able to use that money and have a mortgage via that money? But of course, as our previous guest made the point, that means that we, the taxpayer, are paying somebody else's mortgage. And when we've spent the last year paying people's wages, we're now paying people's energy bills. What did I say at the time, didn't I? It won't be long before we're paying people's mortgages. Bingo! I've just thought that through. It's just arrived. How will this policy pan out? Sam Carr says the right to buy in the Thatcher era was one of the worst thought-through policies because they should have sold them cheap and should have built and replaced the stock. Let's not go down that road again. Just build more affordable houses. It seems to me to be beyond the wit of any politician. Have you heard Keir Starmer, for example, He's Her Majesty's official opposition. Have you heard him say, well, the government got it wrong, this is how they get it right? Build more homes and build more affordable homes. And affordable homes aren't homes that start with the number 3. They're homes that start with the number 1 in them, possibly 2, but certainly not 3 or 4. You go past those big... You've seen that in big cities. I saw it in Manchester. I see it in London all the time. Move in today for... They put the word only in there. Only 410,000. Whoa, 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 whoa. Don't put the word only in front of the figure 400,000. There's no only that goes in the front of that. That's robbery, mate. It's bricks and mortar. And, of course, the demand has meant that the price is where it's at. There must be a way of addressing that. Let's go to Liam in Monmouthshire. How you doing, Liam?
Good, thank you.
Good. What are your thoughts on this?
So I was calling up to touch on your point about my generation, if you like. I'm 31, finding it almost impossible to get on the property ladder. I've just bought my second house, and I'm not calling to brag, but I'm about to become a private landlord for the one house and living in the other.
Okay.
And I think the issue that we've got is we've got a generation who just want everything given to them, and they feel sorry for themselves if family don't help them out to get onto the ladder, but they're not prepared to make the sacrifice. And people don't want to stay in on the weekend. People don't want to not eat off, Just Eat and Deliveroo and Uber Eats every single night. And the point I'm trying to make is that it is completely possible, certainly if you still live with your parents, or to save 10% of your salary if you genuinely have your heart set on achieving those goals.
Do you sense that this policy, Liam, which, as our previous contributor said, is essentially the taxpayer paying other people's mortgages, do you sense that this policy is more about the Prime Minister saving his skin than it is about getting people to own homes?
Certainly, it's a bit of good PR for him in a time where everything else isn't looking so great, isn't it? And I think it's the potential for a huge can of worms, because, say for example, somebody's already got a mortgage and they get made redundant. Can they then get housing benefit to carry on paying their mortgage and not go back to work? It's got so many downfalls.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, my first question is, how long is somebody on? I mean, if somebody stays on housing benefit for 20 years, that just essentially means somebody else has paid for your house.
They've just bought you a house, exactly. So they may as well just give it to them from the off.
Well, it's a nice thought. I'd quite like somebody to buy me an extra house, Liam.
Exactly. And I think a very good point from the last caller as well, the part about the repairs and, these people are so used to having everything done for them, and it's going to, be a nightmare, and everyone will just be handing the houses back within 5 years.
Listen, Liam, I just sadly spot on. I wish you weren't, but I think you are. Liam in Monmouthshire, thank you for that. We will get further details. Of course, the Prime Minister, we heard a little snippet of it earlier, is speaking in Blackpool on a range of issues. Some of the cost of living areas he's already referred to. Will he do something about the cost of petrol? I think we quite like that to be the case. $2.20 a litre for a drop of diesel. Are they having a laugh? Goodness me. The government, of course, take 50% of that. Rishi Sunak, very simple instruction from the people of this country: do something about it. Right now, you are in receipt of the most enormous windfall at the Treasury. As that goes up, your receipts go up as well. You're doing very nicely about it. Throw a bit back. We will get some back, by the way. You wait. Give it a month or two when Rishi either... when he gives his autumn statement or at some emergency measure takes place, he'll say, yes, I'm now taking 10p off the cost. No. Forget all of that nonsense. Just halve it. Do something substantial. Make it temporary. I get that. You've got considerations too. But this cannot go on. This cannot go on. One here, Dead as a Dodo, says, why has this guy got 2 houses? Because he wanted to buy 2 houses. I think, Dodo, that's probably what happened there. He said, I fancy buying another house, so he bought another house. He's actually looking after his own in that respect, his own destiny. Over here we've got Simon in Ipswich. You got a solution for us, Simon? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Right, it's a bit of a long one, so you have to bear with, okay?
No, bearing.
All right. The solution is this. No more private landlords. So your fella who's just on, Liam...
Yep, goes to jail.
He's bought no. Listen, he's doing what he thinks he's going to do best for him. So, but let's take Liam. In a few years' time, Liam will buy another house, and he'll buy another house, and he'll end up with 10, 20 properties. Okay? And what he'll be doing is he'll buy up the cheap housing stock. And that's a stock that the first-time buyers used to buy. They're the ones that the people on low incomes used to buy. But now they're all bought up by extremely rich people and then let out at twice the price of their mortgage. And they're just sitting there getting paid and the mortgage paid. And eventually they'll be able to sell these properties and disappear off on a yacht in the Mediterranean. Yeah. Exactly. If you were to basically stop that, you think of all those hundreds of thousands of low-priced houses that would be back on the market for people, young people, 30-year-olds, trying to get on the ladder. They'll be able to buy them. They'd actually be available. Anything that's within their price range is bought up by private landlords and then rented back to them for twice the price, so they've got no chance of ever saving if they want to have a life. Now, not everybody lives on Just Eat. Some people are frugal, and they just can't afford to pay your mortgage and your pension.
The spirit of what you say, I think you've thrown in a massive stereotype that they're all rich old duffers who are coining it in, where some people, the average landlord owns one property, and it usually covers the mortgage.
Okay, I'll tell you something. I live in a rented property. The bloke who owns my house owns a house either side of mine. And I know of at least 3 or 4 on the same street that he owns. No, I don't dispute there are people who own multiple homes, but the average landlord in this country owns 1 or 2. Yeah, no, there's a lot out there. I've rented for the past 10 years, and I've known multiple landlords who have got, and I'm in the building maintenance, so I know, I've worked on their premises, I've worked on those properties, and they are owning tens of houses. Yeah,
there are people like that, but people often inherit a house because a parent dies or something.
Then sell it, invest your money somewhere else.
Why do you have to sell it?
Well, because it's exploiting other people. Now, you see...
No, it's your mum's house. You inherit your mum's house.
Then move into it.
You already got a house.
You live there if it's that important to you.
Why can't you rent out the house so nobody rents anymore?
Because... like I'm saying, it would actually be better for society, for people. Look at it this way, right? If I am paying a rent of £1,000 a month, but actually the bloke who owns my house pays £500 mortgage.
Yep.
I buy that house.
Good luck to him, isn't it?
Maybe more, or you could think of the greater good here. Okay, and I now pay £500 mortgage. I've got £500 in my pocket extra.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Is there then a happy... Yeah, no, I hear you, Simon. Is there a happy medium where you could say, OK, he's not allowed to charge that amount for the rent, but then you get into rent cap, so he could charge £700, so he makes £200 a month. It's his risk, it's his business. He makes a couple of £100, and you get a cheaper rent. Maybe. I don't know. 0344 499 1000. More of that in a few moments' time. I'll bring you an update on what Boris Johnson is saying. He is talking about the government being firmly on your side. All on the way on Talk TV. This in from James, who says, why do we not have a system where rents are capped? We were talking about this. I know this isn't always politically popular, but how on earth do you expect people on low incomes to ever rent a place, let alone buy one, when prices are through the roof? I wish I had an answer to that. I'm told incessantly that when anyone talks about price caps on rents, that it sounds like a good idea on paper. You can only charge X amount. Why would you allow people just to, ridiculously inflate the cost? Then you get into, market values and pressures. So, OK, you're doing it cheap, but the bloke over the road's doing it more expensive. I'm told it just doesn't work, because they did do it, didn't they, in the 70s or something? Didn't they have rent caps? If anybody can tell me why that didn't work, I'm intrigued. 0344 499 1000. Back to your call. Sandra is in Suffolk. What are you thinking, Sandra? Good afternoon to you.
Hello to you. Yes, mortgages for benefit people. The thing that bothers me is that it doesn't stop with a mortgage. There's council tax to pay on top, which is pretty heavy in places.
Yep.
Home insurance and the cost of repairs to the building and everything else goes on. Now, very often, rents will include the council tax and maybe a bit of insurance as well. But certainly, this is all going to fall on to these people. It's not just going to be about the mortgage. It's going to be about all these other things as well. And I don't think people have... It's not necessarily a crazy idea, but it does sound as if it's, hasn't been thought through.
Yeah, and it does sound, sorry to repeat myself here, Sandra, but it does sound very much like Mr Johnson might be trying to appease some of those backbenchers who's fallen out with him.
Could do. I'm not sure that's entirely the case. I don't quite know where the Conservative Party is going to at the moment, and I am a Conservative voter because I believe basically in their beliefs. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, things just are being snatched out of the air at the moment. It's not being thought through. Yeah. And I think this is where this mortgage for benefit payers is going to fall right down.
Well, I think so too. Sandra, thank you for that. The detail will be rather interesting, and over the next few days, as always, the bean counters get into these ideas. They look at the financial implications, how many people it will affect. Again, Michael Gove this morning appearing with Julia Hartley-Brewer on Breakfast. She tried to get an answer from him. This is the bloke in charge of housing, for goodness sake. So, look, how many people he didn't know. He didn't have an idea, and it sounded very much like Michael Gove probably didn't even know about the policy until late last night when somebody in Downing Street rang him up and said, you're doing the media rounds tomorrow. We've just announced, we're going to announce this seismic policy about how people can buy homes. There is a clear issue whether this is the answer to it. I think with Boris Johnson, there's no doubt about it, the kind of right to buy has echoes of the Thatcher thing. And I sense, I know Sandra wasn't so sure there, but I sense that those backbenchers that fell out with him will be thinking, it's a bit Thatcherite, a bit Thatchery, so therefore what's not to like? Sean says, there's a very simple way to stop housing crisis. Stop uncontrolled immigration. There are too many people, not enough houses. This is just another ridiculous Johnson idea. He should start being a Conservative and not a measly socialist. And I certainly understand that. I don't think, and you're right, by the way, about, the idea that we've got hundreds or thousands of people in hotels. The government are paying... I'd love to know what the full number is, how many hotels. Surely even the most die-hard lefty would look at that and go, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. We've got thousands of people in hotels. The government are buying out the Holiday Inn or the Four Seasons. I doubt it would be the latter, but, hey, what a nice thought. Just so that you can put up some immigrants. And there may well be a moral component to this. I'm not making that point. But surely that isn't the answer on that one. In terms of housing, I don't think the number of those people, as tricky and as uncomfortable as that is to many people, I think the number of people looking for houses far outweighs that figure. It doesn't help. And Sean is absolutely right, but we're talking of hundreds of thousands of people that need somewhere to live. 30 or 40,000 or however many it is, won't help the matter. But if you removed all of those people in hotels and addressed illegal immigration, I still think you'd be left with this problem. That's my sense. However, but on that separate point, I mean, it's just beyond anything our forefathers could have imagined that this is where we've got to. Our government paying en masse, block booking, not just a couple of rooms, but the entirety of a hotel. So now we're not just paying people's wages. We're not just paying their energy bills. We're now paying their mortgages. We're also buying hotels. Like a curious, wacky game of poor man's Monopoly. Kevin is in North Yorkshire. What's happening, Kevin? Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I don't think that the issue around buying houses is bad, as people say it is. It's another issue to ramp up hysteria about this. I've worked with people in the late 20s, early 30s. The problem with them is they want instant gratification with stuff. The problem that you find is a lot of them that I knew were buying houses, were getting houses, but they were mortgaged up to the eyeballs. But not only that, everything in those houses had to be brand new. They had to go on 2 holidays a year. Their credit cards are up to the max. Everything is about, it must be, I must have it now. And I'm going to sound like an old duffer, but when I bought a house, I could afford the house and I had to work for things and build the stock up in that house.
Yeah.
And it doesn't appear to be like that now. It's instant gratification. Things are difficult, but they're certainly not as difficult as they were. They may be getting that way. They may be soon going back towards the 70s, but that was a different time. People have money. People do have it. There's the bank of mum and dad. People that have made their fortunes are willing to give money to the children and do these things. But the fact of the matter is, people want instant gratification. They've got to have the up-to-date iPhone, the biggest laptop they can get.
The American fridge, that's the biggie, isn't it? The American fridge.
Yeah.
Got a fridge the size of my garage.
And now what you want is a government that's so far removed from conservative ideology that I disagree with some degree that they're playing up to the backbenchers. A lot of the backbenchers are true conservatives, and we'll be looking at this in horror. It's almost gone back to, if he's trying to emulate Maggie Thatcher, he's totally got it wrong. He's completely got it wrong. She made it possible for people to buy council houses, reduce the price of those houses to how long they'd been in those council houses. It was relevant how long they'd been in it. But only then, if they could afford the down payment and they could afford the mortgage, they would get those houses. It wasn't a given. It wasn't a given at all. People had to work. People had to still work and go get it. The taxpayer wasn't paying for them. And now he wants the taxpayer. You couldn't get more non-conservative than that. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It is, yes, it is, absolutely. No doubt about it. I think this might be one of those schemes, Kev, that just doesn't go anywhere and it gets quietly buried, perhaps. Thank you, Kevin, in North Yorkshire. So Boris Johnson, here's some of the detail, has confirmed plans to extend the right to buy to tenants of housing association homes. He said, these are his words, there are 2.5 million households whose homes belong to associations, saying that they are trapped. They can't buy and they don't have the security of ownership. They can't treat their home as their own or make the improvements they want. He said that some associations have treated tenants with scandalous indifference. So it's time for change. Over the coming months, we will look to work with the sector to bring forward a new right to buy scheme. So how is that going to pan out? Now, if you're not on housing benefits, that might work out just fine. But as a previous caller said, our housing association is going to just sort of offlift all the old stock, the stock that isn't in best nick. Is there going to be that problem? How often or how many people will be on the benefit side of this, which would essentially mean that the taxpayer is paying other people's mortgages. I mean, these are extraordinary times. Bella says, just on another point that I made, I'm one of those people that think it's a good idea that we put people up in hotels to help. Does that make me an idiot? Well, yes. 0344 499 1000. That cannot be the answer, right? That cannot be the answer to the problems that we are facing. Government block booking dozens and dozens of hotels up and down the country. The world's gone stark raving mad. Nobody could. Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't think that's a good idea. Goodness sake. And we can't find houses for other people. I like our last caller's point, though, which started where I began, when I said, actually, despite the headlines, despite the doomsayers, there are still people who can afford homes. Every day in this country, mortgage companies approve thousands of mortgages over the course of any 1 week, and not all of those people are rich old duffers. Some of those will be under 30. They're not on massive salaries. Are you one of those people that, against all the predictions, against all the headlines, you've managed to make it work and buy your own place? 0344 499 1000. Coming up, of course, we have the very first of our People's Question Time. 3 listeners joining us to debate the issues of the day. And a former charity boss is advising for major reforms on the smoking laws. All of that is on the way. Our lines remain open. You are watching Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios, and the news is next.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 2.
Good afternoon, I'm Zora Suleiman. In the last hour, Boris Johnson has insisted it's time to stop spending and start cutting taxes. Speaking in Liverpool, the Prime Minister urged the public to pull together through the cost of living crisis and said taxes must come down in a sign families could get extra help. He said he's confident things will get better and that the UK will come out of the other side with a strong, healthy economy. Well, the Prime Minister also unveiled plans to help low-income families in England get onto the property ladder, including better access to low-deposit mortgages. Well, it comes as the RAC says it is really a truly dark day for drivers, as the cost of filling an average family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. The average cost of a litre of petrol has risen to £1.82 for diesel. A litre is now £1.88. Well, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith has told us the world's over-reliance on Russian oil and gas is partly to blame.
We and other countries over the last number of governments decided that it didn't matter and we could just buy energy from anywhere, and we stopped producing our own energy. We're sitting on North Sea oil and gas, and we also have shale gas reserves here in the UK. So it's time for us to start thinking seriously about even going for net zero. You're going to need gas well into past that. We've got to start producing our own.
The chief of police in Paris has apologised for tear-gassing Liverpool fans at the Champions League final and admitted that maybe he was wrong. Didier Lallement said it was a failure and that he had no other option. Thousands of fans with tickets were unable to get into the stadium for the match against Real Madrid. Train drivers from 3 more rail companies are set to stage strikes later this month. The ASLEF union announced those working for Hull Trains, Greater Anglia and Croydon Tramlink will take part in industrial action in separate disputes over pay. It has up to 50,000 RMT union members are set to walk out on 3 days in June, the biggest British rail strike since 1989. Prosecutors in the US have recommended R. Kelly serve at least 25 years in prison following his sex trafficking conviction. The disgraced R&B singer was found guilty of multiple offences during a sex abuse trial last year, where several of his accusers testified. He's due to be sentenced on the 29th of June. And Prince William has been pictured selling the big issue in central London. The future king donned a red seller's vest and a hat in Westminster. Kensington Palace says it's connected to a project for his 40th birthday. That's the latest. Now time for today's weather.
Sunday Times Culture sponsors Talk TV Weather.
Hello, I'm Nazanin Gaffer. An east-west split with the weather today. Through the night, we've seen a band of rain move its way very slowly eastwards, and through this afternoon, it will be moving into western parts of the UK. So we've seen some rain already across parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland. That rain, the cloud as well, is also creeping into western parts of Scotland, parts of Wales, the West Midlands and the West Country towards the end of today. Ahead of that, there will be a little bit of cloud building up, as you can see, across some central areas, but generally around central and eastern parts of the UK today, I think it's looking mostly fine, bright, especially around eastern parts of England and eastern Scotland. And it's feeling warm in the sunshine too, particularly down towards parts of south east. Temperature highs locally could be around 23 to 24 degrees Celsius. So, as I said, an east-west divide for tonight, but overnight we'll continue to see that band of rain, mostly becoming light and patchy, clearing away eastwards, but it probably lingers down towards parts of the southeast. Clear spells elsewhere. And then tomorrow we see a bit of a different flavour with the weather as it becomes windy, as we see the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex approaching the northwest of the UK. That's going to bring very windy conditions across parts of the northwest. Also some showers there, but for central, southern and eastern parts of the UK, it's looking mostly fine, dry, sunny and warm.
Times Sport sponsors Talk TV Weather.
On my fantasy talk show, it's still a fantasy, yeah? Who would be my 3 guests? Piers, undoubtedly. The Queen. Margaret Thatcher, nailed on.
4 minutes after 2, good afternoon. So let's remind ourselves how this all started.
If you've been a council tenant for at least 3 years, You'll have the right by law to buy your house, and that's that. And you'll be able to buy it at a price that's 1/3 below market value.
There it is, Margaret Thatcher's Right to Buy scheme, first announced in the 70s. Today, Boris Johnson says he wants to replicate this. Is owning your own home still the ultimate goal? Well, earlier we speak to Russell Conway. He's a lawyer who specialises in landlord and tenant matters. He says it's an interesting proposal from the government, but it won't be straightforward.
It might be suggested that somebody who is on universal credit wouldn't be able to get anything of a deposit together, and would the mortgage company be interested in such a risk? I very much doubt it.
And we'll take more of your calls on that shortly. Also this afternoon, and this really is our favourite clip.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose.
I love that they have the shot of him in his own surgery having a sneaky cig, or not so sneaky cig. The age at which you can start smoking should be increased, according to a government review. It all sounds very noble, but can you really tell grown adults what they can and cannot do? We'll look at that in just a few moments. The People's Question Time kicks off this afternoon. We have a panel of 3 listeners debating the big issues of the day, so stand by for all of that. One of those issues will certainly be petrol. The government still say on this very issue they have your back.
Governments are looking vigilantly at what's happening on the forecourts. If we think that there's any anti-competitive practice going on, there is a watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, that can step in. It's a very tough situation, and of course it's linked, as we all know, to war in Ukraine.
Well, the rising cost of fuel continues to dominate. This week has seen the biggest daily increase in 17 years, and we're looking at over £2 for a litre of unleaded. £2.20 is the highest we've seen for a litre of diesel, for goodness sake. What is going on, and how much longer can that go on for? We'll have more from you on that as well. 0344 499 1000 is where you will find us. Back to more of your comment on the big thread this afternoon, Boris Johnson's new initiative, the right to buy. And the right to buy social housing. Once upon a time would have been council housing, of course, but all that social housing is now privately owned. This one in from Liam. Anyone who actually realised that most people needing housing benefit are living way beyond their means as it is. How do you think they get the mortgage in the first place? Well, you do wonder how that's ever going to pan out, for goodness sake. I have no idea how this scheme is going to work. He's looking at 2.5 million people who could be affected by this. And I do sense, and I don't want to be too cynical, I think the Prime Minister has clearly had enough thrown at him, but I don't think it's unreasonable to at least wonder whether this is really about throwing some meat to the backbenchers. Look at me, I'm Boris, I'm back. Remember Mrs Thatcher, right to buy council, I'm going to do the same here. Now you can like me again, and if we have another vote of no confidence in a year's time, you can vote for me. Is that kind of where we're at? It does sort of feel a little bit like that. Another one here that comes in from No Name Given. The ongoing buy your own home is like it's a badge of honour, to be honest. Also, we have this stigma that really started with Margaret Thatcher, that if you live in a council property or a housing association, you're looked down upon. I don't know anyone that thinks that, and I certainly don't remember it under Mrs T. I might have been a kid at the time, but I mean, her point was the very opposite to that, was that people in those positions shouldn't be looked down upon. They should be allowed a stake in their own home and buy their own home if they want to. And the scheme on the face of it was really good. It kind of made so much sense. There's a council house. I mean, look, the argument about rebuilding social housing is largely a separate point, but this does feed into it. And I think it would have needed more social housing even if nobody had bought their council homes. That's the point that doesn't really get mentioned in all of this. Because otherwise you'd have just my mum and dad would have just carried on living in their council house forevermore. They wouldn't have been freeing that up for somebody else, not for like decades and decades later. So it wouldn't have fully addressed, it's a bit of an urban myth that it would have fully somehow addressed the issue of social housing, just if you hadn't sold the council homes. Michelle is in Birmingham on this point. Michelle, good afternoon to you.
Hi, are you all right?
I'm all right, thanks. Yeah, fire away. What have you got for us?
Okay, I've listened to the people that have rang in, and I think some people need to get off the soapboxes, really, because we don't live in the Victorian times anymore. Our children don't go in workhouses from we're now classed as low-income families. They go to school, and I think everybody deserves a fair chance. I understand the points of people that think, well, if somebody's sat at home, you know, watching, I don't know, loose women eating a Greg's sausage roll, that they shouldn't have that opportunity.
It's the best way to spend an afternoon, surely.
I don't know, I don't like Greg.
I had one just yesterday, as it happens. But listen, I take your point that there is a stereotype there.
Yeah, there is. We're not all characters from Shameless, and there's, like, say, for my situation, I'm a carer for my son. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to have a child and he's going to have these medical conditions, and then I'm not going to work and I'm just going to sit on my backside. It's not like that for some people. Everybody should be afforded the opportunity. What sickens me is not just the social housing system, but I'm a Nottingham lass originally, so moving to a city like Birmingham, the housing situation is really bad here.
Yep.
And the property next door to us, fortunately, we have a house, and it's a council property, was recently sold to a private landlord. And a lady knocked on my door, and she asked me if she could look at the size of the back garden that she had applied to rent the property. And she told me she was in high-rise flats, 2-bedroom flat, 3 children. And but universal credit, so this probably comes in with the caller that was saying they should cap the rents on private rented properties in a kind of untoward way. They are capped for people that are on benefits because universal credits will only pay a certain amount.
Of course.
And she was looking at needing to find £300 extra, and all she wanted was a back garden for her children.
Wow.
And should that be classed as a luxury? I don't think it should be.
So she was looking at the property that was council, been sold privately, and she was thinking of renting it and wanted a peek at the back garden.
And the rent, £795 a calendar month. She said universal credits had said they'd pay, I think it was about £490 because it was 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
She would have to then find the rest.
Got it.
But all she was actually interested in was the size of the back garden, and that she could get her children a trampoline, and her children could play. And I just think it's really sad. And I understand if people work hard. Look, my mum and dad worked all their lives. They bought their council property on the right to buy. And sold it, and my mum brought her own business, and they did things. I understand that. I know that private landlords, a lot of them, it's a business, an extra income. But there's got to be give and take. And the hotel thing, you can't have people living in hotels with children as a normal, everyday thing. So if I had the answers, I'd run for Prime Minister, but...
Yeah, well, maybe you should be, Michelle. I mean, that opportunity might be open and available sooner than you think at this rate. Michelle, thank you. It's a cracking call. Hard to argue with any of those points. Michelle in Birmingham. 13 minutes after 2 o'clock. Now, the age at which you can buy tobacco and cigarettes in England should be raised year by year so that eventually no one can buy them, according to a review. The call has been made in an independent report by ex-charity boss Javid Khan and asked for by ministers. Under the plan, the age of sale would rise from 18 by 1 year every year so that kids today would never be allowed to buy tobacco. The government has not agreed to the plan yet, but said it would consider it. Should we just ban smoking altogether? Andy Lloyd is head of media and communication at Fresh. Now, that's a dedicated regional tobacco control programme in the North East, and this was set up to tackle the worst rates of smoking-related illnesses and deaths in the country. Andy, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Now, listen, on the face of it, anything that stops people from smoking, good idea. Nobody disagrees with that. There's a libertarian argument, of course, that says, hang on a sec, we're all adults now. We know this stuff could kill you and very bad for you, emphysema, cancer, God knows what else. So, you know, how can you stop a 19, 20-year-old from buying a packet of cigs?
I think it's a good point, Ian, and I think this is all about getting a balance. And I think the main thing about today's report, which we hugely welcome, it's a bit of a shock to remind us all the scale of smoking, you know, and we kind of drift along, accepting the death and the disease. Certainly for the region like the North East, we've nearly halved smoking since 2005, but it's our biggest killer. We've recently discovered that smoking has killed 113,000 people in our region since the year 2000. Now, if you think about St James's Park and the stadium alike together, you know, two full capacity crowds at our region's biggest football grounds.
Yeah.
More than that, people in terms of numbers have died from smoking since that time, and that's just incredible. That's unacceptable. So what the report today is really for us about is just saying, look, we need to do something about it. You know, the nuts and bolts, the how we get there, that comes a bit later. In terms of the big ticket item, which is around the age of sale to 21, we really welcome the notion that, you know, look, you know, tobacco is a uniquely dangerous product. I mean, this is incredible. It almost defies belief me even saying it. But, you know, 2 out of 3 smokers will die, you know, by buying a product that's addictive, that most people get hooked on as kids. And when used as the manufacturer intends, it's going to cause lung cancer. It's going to cause COPD. You know, it's going to cause suffering. It traps people into a lifetime of addiction and a drain on their finances. So, you know, there are other parts of the world that are doing this. In America, you know, the age of sale has gone up to 21. They saw a pretty radical reduction in young people smoking as a result of that. This is being suggested at the moment in New Zealand with this kind of, you know, notion.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's less about kind of banning people who are 19 today from buying cigarettes, but, you know, it's never going to be stopping an adult who wants to buy tobacco from buying it. But it's going to be about, you know, the notion that, you know, a child today won't be able to go into a shop and legally buy it. You know, I speak here as somebody who smoked themselves once. I speak here as a dad of an 18-year-old. And if you could say to me that, hey, you know, when the day my son turns 18, he's not going to be able to go into a tobacconist and buy, or a newsagent and buy cigarettes, I kind of welcome that. And I think most smokers themselves, you know, again, it's that balance between, you know, people's rights, but also kind of what we want for the next generation.
There's always, I guess there's always going to be, Andy, isn't there, people who will say, well, hang on a sec, you know, he could go and fight in a war, you could buy a house, you could get married, you could have kids, you could go to the pub and get slaughtered, but you can't buy a cigarette when everybody else can.
Yeah, and the point was made, I think, on a similar station the other day around sort of army bomb disposal experts, and of course, you know, in that situation, you know, those people are trained. You're never going to train the lungs to cope with smoking. I mean, you know, when our bodies are just not designed to smoke. You know, again, these are products that cause lung cancer. They produce 70 cancer-causing chemicals, and it's not about telling people who smoke today they can't smoke. It's about creating a system where people won't be able to go in and smoke in the future.
Okay.
I mean that's this is the big thing that's been raised in this report. But nothing in itself as a silver bullet. You know, that there are a number of things in this report. The biggest thing of all is just sort of saying we need to be funding work to support more smokers to quit. If you know, and most smokers do want to quit. Most smokers have tried before. Vaping is something that could really help us. Most of all, I know you're busy and I need to finish, but the tobacco companies themselves, they're, you know, the big tobacco companies, they make more money than the likes of Disney, Coca-Cola, FedEx, McDonald's.
Still to this day, they're making that kind of money. Just a very final question, if I could, Andy. I know we are short on time, but as quick as you can, if you don't mind. Do you think there's any hope of the government adopting the findings of this review?
We really hope so. I think most of all, this is a popular measure. Most smokers and most adults want more done. In fact, recent surveys show that only 6% of people oppose or think the government's doing too much on smoking, and there's cross-party support for this. That's really crucial. And you know, whether you support Labour, Conservatives, or whoever, you know, we've all got a tragic story to tell around how smoking's harmed somebody we loved. So we really hope the government will grasp this, pick it up, and do more to make smoking history.
Listen, we will watch with interest, and we will speak again. Andy, thank you. Andy Lloyd, Head of Media and Communication at Fresh. So, why did you stop, or why will you not stop? There's an obvious question. 0344 499 1000. 22 minutes after 2 o'clock. Shall we go back to more of your comment? This is Talk TV. We're live from the Talk Radio studios. Lots to get through, including People's Question. The People's Question time. 3 of our listeners joining us this afternoon on that at around about 3 o'clock to debate some of those big issues of the day. Let's go to Charles in Bagshot. How you doing, Charles?
Hi, thanks. Thank you very much for taking my call. Right. I'm honestly livid. I'm livid about this. No one said anything. What about the millions who are not in housing association houses, not in council houses, not receiving any benefits, but are out earning just an average salary, got no hope of getting on the housing ladder? Why should they be subsidising the purchase of people who have had their rent and bills subsidised all these years while they've had to pay up everything out of their own money? Yep. I think it's immoral and despicable. And the clumsy way he said every house will be replaced, the economic illiteracy of that. And then you'll have Michael Gove's NIMBY neighbour policy will kick in and say, oh, we don't want any of those houses built on our street. It's obscene. It's just, I'm sorry.
The bit that really I can't... I'm with you, Charles, and I hear the anger as well. The bit that I can't fathom is that the very first point you made, that, you know, what about those other people and those that have no chance of affording it, but if you happen to be in a housing association, you're going to be helped out. I can't imagine what the government's answer is to that, because I think what you've raised is I would have thought, a fairly solid, unarguable point.
The other thing, Ian, can we stop bashing up buy-to-let landlords? I'm a tenant, but this bashing up buy-to-let landlords, they're the only people providing houses for people in my situation. And, you know... This is, that's another thing that gets on my nerves.
Okay.
It's a supply and demand issue. I mean, the last person that actually helped private renters was Theresa May, and it wasn't too much fanfare when she got rid of the rip-off letting agent fees. That was the last Prime Minister that did anything.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Listen, Charles, if I did, I'd forgotten. Listen, Charles, thank you for that. Is it rent caps? We often hear they were terrible when they were around. On that very point, Rob is in the East Midlands. Tell us more about this, Rob. Why were these things that sound on the surface like a very reasonable, very fair thing to have, why don't they work?
Good afternoon to you, Ian. Well, first, can I just say thanks to Charles, because we are one of those private landlords who do try and treat our tenants properly.
Okay.
And at least he recognises that fact. There are 2 or 3 points, to be quite honest, Ian, regarding rental caps. Yeah. Firstly, it's the nature of the market. If you set a rental cap, all rents will go to that cap. There won't be anybody pulling it back, charging 20, 30, 40, 50 pound a month less than the maximum. They will charge the maximum.
Okay, yeah.
That's just the way it will happen, right? The other thing is that when we rent out, we've got 2 apartments. We bought them last year. We charge below the market rate, right, for those apartments. And the reason why is to encourage people like Charles to stay in that as a tenant of ours for a longer period. Because it's more cost, it's more hassle, whatever, when we change tenants. So we want those tenants to stay there for as long as we can. And in order to do that, we've got to treat them right. And if you've got a good tenant, why would you upset them? Yeah. Right? So it's continuity of rental income that is important in order to keep that tenant in the property. And the thing is, if the rents are also capped, we don't just pocket that money that comes in as a rent each month, 100% of it. We can't. We've got expenses. There are service charges, maintenance charges, insurance charges. We have to pay for gas and electricity checks every year. We've got to maintain those apartments as well.
Yep.
Right. So if your income is being restricted in that way, you can't do it. Now, except that there's not every private landlord is the same as we are. Right. However, I think there are more like us than people actually understand.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I rented a place, but between properties. I sold a place, wasn't sure where I wanted to go, and then I thought, do you know what, I'm going to rent for a bit. And I had a landlord that, and if you're listening, Pete, in Chislehurst, he knows who he is, who was fantastic. The rent never increased in all the time I was there, Rob. It stayed where it was. And I was, a good... He'd had some horror story tenants in there in the past, but, I kept myself to myself, kept the place nice and clean. I wouldn't want it any other way. If I needed, if it needed new things or something had gone wrong, he was there to sort it out. And the kind of payoff for all of that, he never once raised the rent. That was way below market value.
Absolutely, absolutely. We even send out tenants a Christmas card and a little Christmas gift.
That's very nice of you.
I mean, it's not a lot, but it's a little something to say, we appreciate the fact you're still there.
We're not all scumhounds just because we happen to have the word landlord attached to us.
Exactly. We're private individuals as well.
Yeah,
I've been a tenant myself in the past.
Yeah, and you have mortgages to pay too, so...
Exactly.
There you go. Rob, happy to clarify all of that. Thank you. That is Rob in the East Midlands, 0344 499 1000. Reference petrol, Mr. Linton says, I'm a nerd. I built a spreadsheet. I like this already. It sounds brilliant to start with. With a litre costing £1.88, the government receives £82, should that be 82p, in tax. As the duty is 48%, the VAT is 20%. In order to reduce pump prices to 1 year ago, they could slash duty to 18.7%. Then they receive the same take. But will they? So they could slash duty by that amount. So that's the duty, which, of course, Rishi slashed by 5%. But according to Mr. Linton's impressive spreadsheet of creative informity, he could go 18.75 and they receive the same take as last year. Why is it not coming down? I'm told that the crude oil has gone down. Is that true? The price of it? Is there a fact in there, or is that some... get more mischief on social media? 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you in a few moments. And we'll talk about those Rwanda flights. Are they happening? Are they not happening? Details on the way. This is Talk TV Live from the Talk Radio studios.
I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I'm a Talk TV presenter. The last tweet that I really liked was a guy on a petrol forecourt who tweeted, "I've just seen a guy on pump 3 fill up with £10 worth of petrol. Where's he driving to? Pump 4? 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, never miss a moment with Talk TV."
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Zora Suleiman. Boris Johnson has insisted it's time to stop spending and start cutting taxes. Speaking in Blackpool this afternoon, the Prime Minister urged the public to pull together through the cost of living crisis and said taxes must come down in a sign Brits could get extra help. Well, it comes as the REC says it is a truly dark day for drivers as the cost of filling an average-sized family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. Well, Boris Johnson also unveiled plans to help low-income families in England get onto the property ladder. He's launched a review into better access to low-deposit mortgages, but the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the plans don't go far enough.
I think the announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today.
The Chief of Police in Paris has apologised for tear-gassing Liverpool fans at the Champions League final and admitted that maybe he was wrong. Didier Lalmend says it was a failure, but that he had no other option. Thousands of fans with tickets were unable to get into the stadium for the match against Real Madrid. Train drivers from 3 more rail companies are set to strike later this month. The ASLEF union announced that staff at Hull Trains, Greater Anglia and Croydon Tramlink will walk out in separate disputes over pay. It's as up to 50,000 RMT union members will stage the biggest British rail strike since 1989 and end at the end of this month. And Prince William has been pictured selling the big issue in central London. Kensington Palace said it's connected to a project for his 40th birthday. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
It is Talk TV, just gone 2:30. People's Question Time at 3 this afternoon. Before then, we'll also talk to Paul Champlina, our friend, of course, who's well across issues surrounding landlords, tenants, and all manner of other issues surrounding property. We'll talk to him as well before 3, in addition to this subject, by the way. And by the way, earlier I mentioned that problem of immigration, and we're talking property and the amount of hotels that the government are having to use, which is clearly unsustainable. This ties right in to that in many respects, because this is Priti Patel's Rwanda policy, and the Home Secretary's first migrant flights to Rwanda is in doubt after legal actions were lodged against it. A coalition of charities and trade unions that represent Border Force staff has applied for an injunction to halt the operation. They're seeking a judicial review of the policy itself. The legal tactics, plus a raft of appeals lodged on behalf of individual migrants, are likely to lead to the flight being postponed pending resolution of issues in court. So will the first Rwanda flight ever take off? Let's speak to Dr. S. Chelvan, Head of Immigration and Public Law at 33 Bedford Road, Chambers. Chelvan, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
This is how it's reported. A group of people who aren't meant to be in the country, they've gone through one process. It's deemed that they don't have the correct credentials for claiming asylum, so therefore the democratically elected government of the day have decreed that the new immigration policy when dealing with these people is to send them to an agreed arrangement in Rwanda. What's wrong with that?
Well, our independent judges, if they're going to grant stays of removal, are deciding that the case in relation to the policy or the individual migrants who are going to be placed on that plane to Rwanda is arguably unlawful. So it's not the lawyers, it's not the NGOs, it's not the civil society groups, it's our independent judges having a proper check and balance and making sure that if any removal to Rwanda is actually lawful. Okay. That's one group of people you didn't mention it in your preamble.
But it would be
our judges who are going to stop.
Okay, but it would be the lawyers. Okay, but lawyers and in this case unions as well got it to that stage, right? So that judges can look over it.
Well, what's brought it to that stage is the Home Secretary's policy of providing this memorandum of understanding, a memorandum of understanding which her own refugee minister was not aware of in early April, a few days before the announcement. So this was a dark secret plan within the Home Office, only known to the Home Secretary and a few of her gang. And now it's about time that we check and balance whether this policy is lawful and whether the actual removals are unlawful. Because it's quite clear that when you look, even you go onto the Foreign Office website this morning, and as you know, I specifically represent lesbian and gay clients, and it actually says there that there is abuse and discrimination by the local authorities of LGBT plus people. So even our Foreign Office accepts that there are a group of prospective refugees who may be sent to Rwanda, because the Home Office policy is that gay people will be sent to Rwanda as well, who are at risk. So what is going on? Why does our Foreign Office agree with these groups that it is risky to send these individuals to Rwanda?
I mean, a small percentage of people will be gay, perhaps, that have come over, not everybody.
Also in relation to women and other vulnerable groups as well. The Home Office promised Parliament in February, when this was going through regarding offshore processing, it wasn't even thought of that they would actually be sent over to Rwanda to have refugee status. But even with offshore processing, the understanding was vulnerable groups such as women, LGBTI people, disabled people.
Well, you're not vulnerable just because you're a woman, of course.
Sorry?
You're not vulnerable just because you're a woman.
If you look at the country conditions of various countries, including Rwanda, women can be at risk because of gender-based and sexual-based violence. Okay. It's a section of the...
But this isn't a flight of LGBTQIPRS people, is it?
Well, with a great, it's Pride Month, so I'm going to let you get away with that. The point being here.
Well, the reason I was being facetious, Chairman, was just to make the point that this is not clearly a gay flight. There might be no gay people on the flight at all, and probably very few women.
You'll find that public opinion is quite clearly against any sending of people from the UK to Rwanda, and even her own officials in the Home Office said that the cost-benefit analysis did not Margaret.
Well, that may be the case, but these are people...
a specific paper to overrule her own permanent secretary in relation.
But these are people who've been very naughty,
aren't
they? These are people
of her own co-workers.
Okay, but these are people who've been very naughty, Chauvin, haven't they? You've got people who come to claim asylum and are correctly given asylum, but then you've got a few people that thought, you know what, I fancy a little bit of the UK, a bit of France, Germany, wherever it happens to be. They didn't pass the test. They shouldn't be here. It was a naughty move on their part, so the government are simply enacting the policy.
No, the statistic, the policy is about those people since the 1st of January who've crossed the channel to come to the UK and claim asylum. They have not had their asylum claim determined here in the UK. What you and I know, Ian, is that 70 to 80% of those people who crossed the channel in the last 12 months, the last statistics were with the Home Office, show that 70 to 80% of those are genuine refugees. So they haven't been naughty.
But these are the others that haven't been. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. So these are not the other group, then, that haven't been successful in their application?
No. This is a cull of anybody who've arrived in the UK after the 1st of January using the channel crossing, that they will be liable for what is called a notice of intention.
OK. But that's thousands and thousands of people since the 1st of January. We're up to about 10,000 people so far. We're not sending 10,000 people to Rwanda.
Well, this is the first batch. We know that up to 100 people have had this notice of intention so far. We're looking at around 10 to be on that first flight next Tuesday, and we know that there are cases being lodged in the last 24 hours and will be lodged prior to Tuesday. But please remember this. It is our independent judges who will be deciding whether that individual will be on that plane or not. And the reason why this is happening is that the only reason why those individuals will not be flown to Rwanda is that it's arguable that their removal from Rwanda is against the law.
Right. So just to clarify then, Sheldon, are you saying that some of these people have not been assessed at all?
None of them have. None of them. The policy is that you've just come on the boat, you claimed asylum in the UK, because you've crossed through the channel through that method, the illegal entry, you will have a notice of intention that you're
So what has happened to as most people understood it, the idea was people come over, they are interviewed, they work out through those interview processes who is a genuine asylum seeker, those that aren't go to Rwanda.
That's not the Rwanda policy. The Rwanda policy is you've claimed asylum, we don't care about assessing your asylum claim, you're off bait.
But that would be ridiculous, because that could be 30,000
That's the policy. Well done, Ian. That is totally ridiculous.
But Priti Patel...
That's the policy.
No, I get you, but Priti Patel will never... If she was sitting here now, she would argue that that isn't the policy, and we're only sending people back who shouldn't be here.
No, sorry, Ian, I may be in a different parallel universe. The Rwanda...
Possibly, you are a lawyer, after all.
Yeah, well, with
a good one, maybe, but, you know.
No, Ian, you've now realised... absolute bonkers. This policy is completely madness. Yeah, we're sending those who've come to claim asylum in the UK. We're not assessing their claims. We are rejecting them purely on the basis that they've crossed the channel after the 1st of January.
Why are people then still having their claims assessed? Because there are still people being assessed on a daily basis in this country. So it's clearly not everybody.
No, they're not these migrants, Ian. These are not these migrants. These come to specific from...
OK, right, I mean, these specific migrants, but they are still migrants who are making the same journey, who are being assessed for their authenticity.
No, Ian, sorry, I apologise that you may...
You don't have to apologise.
The full picture.
Correct me.
The full picture is anybody who has, who I mean, not for children. Okay, so children come out. But however, there is one issue in relation to some issues regarding age assessment. But the point is that any young man who's come from the 1st of January, crossed the channel, had claimed asylum, we are not assessing their claims. We're deporting them.
OK, so no claims will be assessed. Listen, Chauvin, I stopped there for no other reason than time. We will speak again, and I hope we do, on this to see where this policy is in a week's time. That flight is meant to take off on Tuesday. Dr S. Chauvin, Head of Immigration and Public Law, 33 Bedford Road, Chambers, with us here on Talk TV. A lot of comment on this. C-Dub says, correct me if I'm wrong, our government is using our money to pay blokes like Chelvin to oppose its policies and our democratic will. Not me, Gov, it's the judges. He said, well, I'm not sure that the government pay him, but there is a possibility that some legal aid is involved, so I stand to be corrected if that is the case. Bernard says, it's simple. If you've not claimed asylum before you arrive in the UK, you can be sent to Rwanda whilst your claim is being processed. If you are not accepted, you can return. If you are accepted, you can return to the UK. If not, you can't. What is the problem with that? And I think there's a practical... Thank you, Bernard, for that. I think there's a practical reason as well. And that's, aside from what you might think of people coming via the channel, etc., but the practical reason is simply homing people who literally have nowhere to... or we have nowhere to put people. We can't find homes for people who live here. So I don't know how we're going to keep increasing. What's 10,000 people this year alone? That is already up on... And you've seen over the years it steadily increases. On and on it goes. Graham says, Dr. Chelvin is everything that is wrong with the justice system. He and his cronies are slowly choking the life out of this country, draining the legal aid budget and getting rich on the proceeds. Anywhere else in the world, he would be in jail. Well, I mean, I come back to that same thing about the right to protest. I kind of like the idea that we have these characters because it reminds me I live in a better place than areas around the world that doesn't have that don't have the legal system or the right to appeal and oppose. That doesn't mean to say it's not hugely frustrating when somebody makes a living out of being a professional agitator. I'm not speaking of him in this context, obviously, but those that do. So it's a kind of curious double-edged sword for me, because I get the idea that, yeah, we do have judges that look at this stuff. And if Priti Patel has come up with a policy that actually is legally unsound, those judges will... We might not like the results of the judges. That's down for Priti Patel to come back with something else, then, that does appease the legal mechanisms, I would guess. This is Daniel in Surrey. Daniel, Reference Housing, how are you doing?
Well, it was Reference Housing until Chelvin came on, and then...
He must have really roasted your spuds there.
He did. I mean, he is the problem. I mean, I want to live in a country where everyone in the boat is rowing in the same direction. And we've had this conversation so many times, but the housing problem is the same as the immigration problem, because if you go back to 1951, 98.8% of the population were white, spoke English as a first language and were broadly Christian. And in less than one man's lifetime, we've got this total and utter mess that no one ever wanted or asked for in our country today. If you go back to the population in 1974, we was talking about earlier, the right to buy, it was 54 million people. Now we've added a third to our population, much of which is down to immigration, again, that no one really wanted or asked for. The problem that Chelvin's got is that the bulk of the population feel like me. We've had far too much immigration of all kinds for far too long. And if we're playing immigration top trumps, you know, people, young men from fighting age males from the Islamic third world, you know, they're low down on immigration top trumps, and no thank you. And I think the bulk of the population feel like me. We've had far too much for far too long, and not just this government, but if any government doesn't pull their finger out and actually act tough, change laws, come out of the Refugee Act 1971 and physically do something instead of 20, 30, 40 years of doing nothing, then they're going to get voted out.
But, Daniel, isn't one of the problems, as I see it, that a lot of immigration has happened because it was asked for? And the obvious example is Windrush in that respect. A lot of immigration came around because UK governments knew, and I'm not talking about illegal immigration here, I'm talking about legal immigration, where governments successively over the years have gone, look, if we don't get X amount of people over here, we're going to have nobody doing that job, and that job.
Yeah, but what you've hit the nail on the head. You said governments have failed to control or controlled immigration.
Yeah.
It's always been unpopular amongst the people. All kinds of mass immigration has been massively unpopular amongst the people. There weren't people down at the harbour, millions of people waving them in. It's always been unpopular. It was unpopular in the 50s and 60s. It was unpopular in the 80s. It's unpopular now. In the last 7 general elections, one of the top 3 topics on the doorstep is always immigration. Yet time after time, we've got governments that refuse or cannot do anything about it. Now the worm has turned. Things have changed. People are demanding change, and they're demanding that, because we're all had to live in it. If you're more than 40 years old, You can remember getting in the car with your dad on a Sunday and Saturday and no one being on the road.
But there were lots of... I mean, I get what you're saying, you know, the era of Carry On Films and Diana Dawes as an example, but I understand all of that. But, of course, the counter to that, I guess, Daniel, is that the world has changed. If you went to France, you'd see the same thing. The reason we have a very different makeup of the human race in this country isn't just down to immigration, of course. People do move around. People change places where they live. The international nature of things like IT, air travel has meant that, you know, it was always going to end up like this, right, regardless.
Yeah, but, I mean, has things changed for the worst? If you go to most of our inner-city areas, you've got young, violent black gangs selling drugs supplied to them by Albanian gangs, right? Fact, get police to bring up and tell you that's the bulk of the problems in our inner cities. We've imported FGM, honour killing, sham marriage, suicide bombing, the full veil, grooming gangs, all from the third world. All of these issues I'm mentioning, that didn't happen 40 years ago, 50 years. It was unheard of.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, I think you are... and I say this not to appease any kind of bizarre Ofcom ruling on this point, Daniel, but I think you're on that point. You're right, but I think that is only one slab of the cheese in the bigger picture, if you like. And we can argue about the bigger picture and whether any kind of immigration is right, and some people would like to see it in a completely reduced across the board, regardless of whether it's legal or otherwise. Daniel, you make a strong point. Thank you for that. I can hear people saying, well, yeah, how do I argue with some of that? Because what we didn't do, the greatest, to me, it isn't just about... We can talk about housing, we can talk about hotels and block booking hotels over there at the Holiday Inn, down in Dover, everything that's going on. To me, the greatest crime that was committed against the British people, and I'm sure the French and the Germans and anyone else would say the same thing, was the issue of cultural assimilation, OK? Cultural assimilation and the ability to find synergy between people is absolutely number one. A prime intellectual responsibility, a moral responsibility of anyone that is saying, right, let's open up the borders for XYZ. Which is why mostly when there was EU immigration, which we still have, of course, there's millions of people who live here from the EU, generally speaking, people might have grumbled that, you know, my daily cost of my labour was reduced because a load of Germans or Polish or Spanish carpenters or plumbers turned up. That's another argument for another day. But most people were not talking about the cultural considerations. And I think that is an issue of cultural assimilation is so big and so large, and it doesn't get mentioned, it doesn't get debated, and when it does, it's written off like some kind of crazy, lunatic, right-wing, mad theory. But it's demonstrably and evidently there for all to see in so many areas of life, and that includes everything from medical issues to education to just the basic point of rubbing along. 0344 499 1000. Let's go to Philip in Yorkshire. Reference our original point. Philip, how are you doing?
Not bad, mate, thanks.
Good. Fire away. What have you got for us?
Well, it's about that original point, like we were talking about the housing issue. It's something that really twists my melons, is this, because I think it's very relative. I mean, yes, houses are much more expensive now, but wages are far more than they used to be. Like, I left school in 1979. I had no qualifications whatsoever, but it still didn't stop me from getting my own house. I mean, my first job was about 25 quid a week. So, but a mortgage then, it was... You
were living the life then, Phil, weren't you?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to sound like one that broke from 4 Yorkshiremen sketch. But
don't mention shoeboxes, yeah.
No, I'm not going to do. But, I mean, the thing is, we managed to buy, neither me or my wife were... we never got any inheritance of any sort. I mean, unless you can call me dad, me great-uncle's bowler rat and spat.
Yep.
You know, that was my inheritance, and even they didn't fit because you had a little head. But the thing was that we bought this old terraced house. It needed a lot of work doing on it. And somebody said earlier on that people want instant gratification, and he was spot on. We couldn't afford that. You had to live within your means. And we did that, but eventually... we got to a point where, I mean, for the first 18 years I was a plasterer,
Yep.
But that was the time of Alf Wiedersein's pet, when all workers were going abroad because the money was in building trade.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so the Brits did a similar thing, right? They went away and I mean, did jobs that were available elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't do that. I eventually, me and my wife decided that we wanted to have a child, so one of us had to carry on working and the other one had to stop at home and look after the kid. So I packed in my job. I looked after my daughter because both his parents were dead. And then I found jobs at night and I got into care industry.
Got it.
And I've been in the care industry for the last 25 years.
Wow.
But by the time...
You know what a long day looks like then?
Oh, yeah, I do. I mean, again, I don't want to sound overly dramatic, but that's the way it was. If you had no help, you had to make do, and you live within your means. You didn't have any holidays.
No, I get it, Philip. I cut in because we're about to hit the news, but I certainly take the absolute point you make there, and thank you for that. That's Philip in Yorkshire. Standby news headlines at 3 coming next, after which it's our very first outing of the People's Question Time. 3 of our listeners joining us to debate, chew over the fat of the big issues of the day. It's all coming up here on Talk TV. We are live from the Talk Radio studios.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 3.
Good afternoon, I'm Zora Suleiman. The Prime Minister has insisted it's time to stop spending and start cutting taxes. Speaking in Blackpool this afternoon, Boris Johnson urged the public to pull together through the cost of living crisis and said taxes must come down in a sign Brits could get extra help. Well, it comes as the RAC says it is a truly dark day for drivers as the cost of filling an average family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. Well, Boris Johnson also unveiled plans to help low-income families in England get onto the property ladder. He's launched a review into better access to low-deposit mortgages, but the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the plans don't go far enough.
I think the announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today.
The Chief of Police in Paris has apologised for tear-gassing Liverpool fans at the Champions League final. He also admitted that maybe he was wrong. Didier Lallement said it was a failure, but that he had no other option. Thousands of fans with tickets were unable to get into the stadium for the match against Real Madrid. Fears of widespread travel chaos across the UK has now intensified after 3 more rail companies announced plans to strike later this month. Train drivers from Hull Trains, Greater Anglia and Croydon Tramlink will walk out in separate disputes over pay. It's as up to 50,000 RMT union members will stage the biggest British rail strike since 1989 at the end of June. Former Transport Secretary Norman Baker says the unions need to rethink.
What the RMT and others appear not to understand is we're in a different world. We're in a different world where the number of people travelling by train and therefore the income from the train passenger is substantially diminished as a consequence of COVID and doesn't show a sign of coming back.
A government review suggests the age at which people can legally buy tobacco in England should rise every year. The plan would create a smoke-free generation with people under a certain age unable to buy cigarettes or other tobacco products in their lifetime. The smoke-free 2030 ambition aims for less than 5% of the population to be smokers. And Prince William has been pictured selling the big issue in central London. The future king donned a red seller's vest and hat in Westminster. Kensington Palace says it's connected to a project for his 40th birthday. That's the latest. Now time for today's weather.
Sunday Times Culture sponsors Talk TV weather.
Hello, I'm Nazanin Gaffer. An east-west split with the weather today. Through the night, we've seen a band of rain move its way very slowly eastwards, and through this afternoon, it will be moving into western parts of the UK. So we've seen some rain already across parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland. That rain, the cloud as well, is also creeping into western parts of Scotland, parts of Wales, the West Midlands and the West Country towards the end of today. Ahead of that, there will be a little bit of cloud building up, as you can see, across some central areas, but generally around central and eastern parts of the UK today, I think it's looking mostly fine, bright, especially around eastern parts of England and eastern Scotland. And it's feeling warm in the sunshine too, particularly down towards parts of the southeast. Temperature highs locally could be around 23 to 24 degrees Celsius. So, as I said, an east-west divide for tonight, but overnight we'll continue to see that band of rain, mostly becoming light and patchy, clearing away eastwards, but it probably lingers down towards parts of the southeast. Clear spells elsewhere. And then tomorrow we see a bit of a different flavour with the weather as it becomes windy, as we see the remnants of Tropical Storm Alex approaching the northwest of the UK. That's going to bring very windy conditions across parts of the northwest. Also some showers there. But for central, southern and eastern parts of the UK, it's looking mostly fine, dry, sunny and warm.
Times Sport sponsors Talk TV weather.
My show is called The Independent Republic of Mike Graham because it's independent and I'm Mike Graham. But inside of that, it's all about you. It's all about the people that call into the show. It's all about what you care about because we know what ordinary people want to know.
Afternoon, 3:05. We're absolutely rammed to the rafters at this end. There's a whole load of things going on. We'll come to that in just a second. And we have a thread up and running. It's reminiscent of how it all started.
If you've been a council tenant for at least 3 years, you'll have the right by law to buy your house, and that's that. And you'll be able to buy it at a price that's 1/3 below market value.
So that, of course, was back in the 70s. Margaret Thatcher's Right to Buy scheme, first announced back then. Today, Boris Johnson wants to replicate this. So is owning your own home still the ultimate goal for most people? Earlier, we spoke with Russell Conway. He's a lawyer who specialises in landlord and tenant matters. He said it's an interesting proposal from the government, but it will not be straightforward.
It might be suggested that somebody who is on universal credit wouldn't be able to get anything of a deposit together, and would the mortgage company be interested in such a risk? I very much doubt it.
And we'll take more of your calls on that throughout the course of the programme. Also this afternoon, here it is again, our favourite clip.
You know, if you were to follow a busy doctor as he makes his daily round of calls, you'd find yourself having a mighty busy time keeping up with him. Time out for many men of medicine usually means just long enough to enjoy a cigarette. And because they know what a pleasure it is to smoke a mild, good-tasting cigarette, they're particular about the brand they choose.
Well, that's how they used to flog tobacco. This is all reference to the story of the age with which you can start smoking should be increased, according to a new review. Year-on-year increases. It all sounds rather noble, but can you really tell a grown adult what they can and cannot do if something is still perfectly legal? The People's Question Time kicks off in a few moments' time. Panel of three of our listeners debating some of the big issues of the day. One of those issues, of course, is undoubtedly going to be petrol. The government will say, though, they have your back.
Governments are looking vigilantly at what's happening on the forecourts. If we think that there's any anti-competitive practice going on, there is a watchdog, the Competition and Markets Authority, that can step in. It's a very tough situation, and of course it's linked, as we all know, to war in Ukraine.
Yeah, well, it's not all linked to Ukraine, Mr. Gove. The rising cost of fuel continues to dominate. This week saw the biggest daily increase in 17 years. We've been spotting this and looking around the country, kind of pump watch here on Talk TV. We've spotted unleaded at over £2 a litre, diesel at £2.20. I mean, a litre, that'll get you from A to B. Is this now the most expensive form of transport on the planet? How much longer can that go on for? 0344 499 1000. That's where you'll find us. Couple of comments in from you. Pete Smith says, Ian, I know you like playing devil's advocate, but conflating the immigrants of the 50s and the 60s who were either invited here or taken in as refugees with tens of thousands of illegal immigrants is a bit of a stretch. In fairness to me, Pete, it was the notion proposed or suggested by Daniel in Surrey. I was merely echoing a wider point about cultural assimilation and all that goes with it. So we're going to look at various issues, including the aforementioned petrol and Boris Johnson and various other things as well, unions and railways. This is People's Question Time, as we decided to call it. We came up with a variety of names for this, and we thought, well, you know, let's just talk to people about a variety of issues. You can bring on every expert you like, although I think all of our guests today have their own and bring their own unique expertise. We say hello to Pav, to Fleur and to Keith. Good afternoon to you all. Pav, a lawyer based in Harrow, a regular caller of ours, Pav.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. That's right, I try to give my views whenever possible, and you're fortunately one of those people who likes a conversation, Ian.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's great to have you with us. Fleur, we spoke. Fleur, you're in Bristol. You're still a student.
Yeah, that's correct.
Wow. How's that going, by the way? What are you studying?
I study Russian. Brilliant timing, I know.
That's popular. Boo.
Yeah, so I thought I'd miss disruption to my degree by avoiding the COVID years and working throughout them. But now, the first year I study Russian, and yeah.
We first spoke, of course, when we were talking about that, I don't know what you call it, that rather inappropriate play that a very worthy theatre group wanted to put on. And you are one of the people that was advocating this is probably deeply inappropriate for young kids.
Yeah, and they've since had their grant removed and the show is no longer going ahead, so...
Yeah.
quite happy about that.
It was all a bit iffy, wasn't it, that one? Welcome, Fleur. And also we have with us Keith Grinstead from Suffolk, Managing Director of Goodbye Hungry, a food poverty campaign group. Keith, good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me on.
It's a pleasure. How's life in sunny Suffolk?
It's gone a bit cloudy at the moment. It's been lovely and sunny all morning, but it's a little bit cloudy now.
Yeah. The good old British thing. We're talking about the weather already, and it's only 3:10. What about that? Let's start then, Pav, with this issue of fuel. Michael Gove was on the breakfast show this morning, essentially saying the government have your back. They recognise the problem. He once again cited Rishi Sunak's 5% cut in duty, of course, which was wiped out within about 12 hours of it being announced. Where does this story go when we're seeing £2.20 for a litre of fuel? Where does it go next, Pav?
I think the government are basically trying to hide their own issues here. It's very easy and convenient for people, both in our government across the Atlantic, to say that it's all down to the Russian situation and the Ukrainian war. But I was looking at some prices from 2008, around the time of the crash. And the price of oil, and I've got this from June 2008, was over $140 a barrel. And correspondingly, we had around about £1.37 a litre of petrol in our petrol stations. You compare that to this morning, a barrel of oil is $123, and as you've said, we've got 220. So this idea that, that it's just about one issue or anything else, to me, it's about government duty and government intervention. I'm sure we'll go on to discuss it here. But if you add into that and factor in lots of other things, I mean, yes, I understand that COVID had a major issue on these things, but we can't just keep banging this one drum. At the end of the day, they've got to own the COVID legislation. They've got to own the lockdowns. And many of us were saying, I said on your show a fair few times, that this is going to have massive economic implications. But at the time, we were given that rather, pathos-laden line, well, health is more important than economy. But we're now seeing that economy is just as important, because if people can't live day to day or they're struggling, at the end of the day, that's going to cause a major problem.
I mean, that's one of the problems, Fleur, isn't it? That, this isn't something that just affects, the mega rich or even the middle class. This affects, predominantly people on lower incomes. And clearly, whether you drive or not, nobody can fail to recognise the serious nature, the severity and the damage that something like this is causing, because we have a cost of living crisis going on all over the place, and if you can't drive, if you can't afford to drive to work, something's gone terribly wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a student, so I am used to living on a budget, and I'm not driving right now, but a lot of my friends are saying that all of their money is going on fuel. And I know when I turned 17 and everyone was sort of deciding, are you going to get a car, how much insurance is going to be? And now another thing that's going to impact whether 17, 18-year-olds decide to learn to drive is, can I realistically afford fuel? And for most young people, unless their parents are willing to help them out a lot, then they can't, and their parents will be feeling it as well. So I think there's going to be a lot fewer young people driving.
Because it used to be about insurance, didn't it? When you're 17 and you first get a car, you'd have these sort of conversations, often slightly drunken in the pub, about, did you know an 1100 Fiesta cost $3,000? There'd be all those kind of conversations just to insure. But now it's actually filling up your tank is going to cost you $3,000 before now.
Yeah, and a black box in the car isn't going to help that either.
That's right, the black box.
I think that they want us all driving electric cars.
Yeah, you are forced to wonder whether there is something going on there. I mean, Keith, you know about you work in an area of food poverty, but there's an obvious point in the Venn diagram where all of these areas mix, right, and they meet, and the cost of living is really causing huge amounts of trouble and jip to average families, and this is just another factor to it, I guess.
Yes, I think it's easy to sort of try and indicate that COVID or Ukraine or something like that have caused these things, but as Pav said, the price increases on fuel have been going on for many, many years. Part of it, I think, some years ago in the Middle East, they were restricting the amount of oil they were shipping out, because they were deliberately keeping the prices high because they didn't want to sell oil and not make the money out of it. And I think the issue now, there's this move towards electric cars, but look at the cost of electricity. And yet the energy companies are all making massive fortunes, massive profits. You've got this, recent talk of the windfall tax. Well, what if the energy companies between now and then invest lots and lots of money in things and actually reduce their profits so that windfall tax will disappear? There are so many things going on, so many things interacting, and you can't place the blame on one thing.
Yeah.
But somehow or another, it's all got to be brought back into reality.
Should we have, do you think we should have, Pav, the government stepping in? I mean, Rishi Sunak at that last spring statement said, look, I'm going to drop, great fanfare around this is going to be, for the first time ever, we're going to cut 5p or 5% rather of fuel duty. And of course, by about the same time the next day, that had been completely wiped out by further increases. So if it is down to the government, and they're having their own windfall here, of course, Pav, because they're making extra money every time it goes up.
You see, and I agree with a lot of what Keith said, but I think that, the narrative we've had in the aftermath of the 2008 crash, people have almost allowed the narrative to be swayed, and I understand to some degree there was an issue, but don't forget in 2008 there were a lot of issues with production in terms of with OPEC, and the point I really want to make was there was a lot of activity going on across the world. So for those who don't remember, there was the legal dispute between Venezuela that affected production. There were strikes in Nigeria. The Iraqi oil 2 pipelines were exploded in 2008. So all this should really have led to prices in 2008 going astronomical. And yet we're still today much lower than they are. So to answer your point, absolutely the government need to get involved. And it's just not good enough. I mean, that 5p cut that he gave on fuel, compared to even, say, Ireland, who were in double digits, Poland, who had about 15p, it was a drop in the ocean. Yeah. And they presented it as though this was some massive policy that was going to have any meaningful impact. They need to get their finger out. And I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that. Now, the divergence is probably going to be how they decide to intervene. Yeah, sorry.
I was about to say that's going to be the big question. Listen, stay with us, Pav. Stay with us, Fleur and Keith. We'll be back for more points. We'll get into that issue as well about Boris Johnson and his tenure in Number 10 after what happened earlier in the week. And strikes, and more strikes. All of that on the way. This is Talk TV. It is People's Question Time. We are delighted to be joined by Pav, by Fleur, by Keith, looking at and debating a variety of issues across the news at the moment. By the way, some breaking news. A court in Russia, a court in a Russian-backed region of Ukraine has issued the death penalty to 2 British fighters and a Moroccan citizen who were captured in Ukraine. This is rather grim news that we're just hearing about, and we'll give you more detail as we get it. But a court in Russia, in a Russian-backed region of Ukraine, has issued the death penalty to 2 British fighters and one Moroccan citizen who were captured in Ukraine. So this is a Russian court acting in Ukrainian territory and throwing out the full might of what they believe are their powers to the extent of issuing capital punishment. More on that as we get it. So Pav, Fleur and Keith still with us. We'd be failing if we didn't, of course, look at Boris Johnson. I mean, Fleur, it's been a rocky old time for the Prime Minister, right, in the last few months. Some say of his own making, but he did survive. Is it time to, cut him some slack and let him go off and do what we elected him to do, and that's run the country?
Well, he was democratically elected, and so are MPs and everyone that voted to keep him in. They've given him a confidence vote, so I don't really think you can argue with that. You can argue whether he is a good Prime Minister, but he does deserve to be in that role still because it's all democratic.
Yeah, well, that's the point, isn't it? I mean, they said, look, here's a vote, and you can't say at the end of it, if somebody survives the vote, well, I'm sorry, we don't like the fact you survived the vote, so we're going to pile on the I mean, the vote's the vote, isn't it?
Yeah, but who knows what could still happen, because we think he's safe, but the 1922 committee could change the rules, and if they want a leadership challenge, then that could happen. And, if the by-elections in Wakefield and Tiverton don't go so well, then if he is the cause of us losing elections, then the party will not want him to stay.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point, Keith, isn't it? That, I mean, he's survived this bit, but there's more to come. There's the committee that have got a rule on whether he misled or lied to Parliament. Then, as Fleur says, there's these 2 by-elections snaking their way around the place at the moment.
It's all just surviving, isn't it? I personally think, he did a lot of work through COVID, and he was probably allowed to run the country because I don't think any of the other political leaders fancied taking over at that time. Nobody else really wanted to deal with that. He's dealt with the COVID situation. To be honest, I think he should do what a lot of MPs have done in the past and decide to retire and spend more time with his family. I think he's done it. I think he's done his piece.
Has he run out of steam, do you think, then, Keith? Do you think that's it? He's only been there 2.5 years.
He just seems to come up with one initiative after another to sort of take the pressure off him. But then when you look back through the track record of what he's actually achieved with all his initiatives, all his pledges, most of them are falling way, way short of the target. And, he just can't multitask. He can't do everything. And I think the big problem they've got is that there's no one else within the party that's capable of taking over, which is why I think that's why he I don't think he won the vote the other day. He didn't lose it as much as they thought he would, because nobody else wants the job.
I mean,
there's nobody else capable.
Yeah, is that the bottom line, really, Pav? That actually what's keeping him there is the absence of somebody to replace him.
I've used that acronym on air with you before called TINA. There is no alternative. And in a lot of professional circles... Is
that a known acronym, or is that your own, Pav? I quite liked invoking TINA in a debate.
I think I got it from cricket circles about 15 years ago, okay, Ian, so I'm not going to... my own invention.
So tell us more about the TINA theory.
Well, this is the thing, and I agree with what the other 2 have said here, but the 2 by-election defeats, in my opinion, were factored in to the vote itself. This is why I think the vote ballooned. And I think what helped him immeasurably was that the vote took place Monday. If that vote had gone on till, say, today or tomorrow, you would have had the opportunity for his detractors to sow greater seeds of discontent, more things coming out over the last couple of days. So I agree that was the lack of alternative is a major issue. But you've got to also bear in mind, and I know this is probably a dirty word in the modern world, there are people, fortunately for him, who are probably still loyal, who realise that, post-Thatcher, he's the only one who's delivered a meaningful majority. Cameron had 7, but that wasn't meaningful. So I do think that played in. But I did find Philip Davies's comments very, very salient, because he was one of the detractors. He came out after the event and said he had voted against, but he hadn't sent in a letter. And when quizzed on exactly why he had voted against it, his points were nothing to do with Partygate. It was about traditional Conservative policies, too high taxes, sufficient state intervention. So I do think, despite people suggesting it's the end, I think there is a way back, but he has to embrace conservatism, as you and I have said on air many times.
Yeah, maybe it's that. Fleur, just a final point on this, Fleur. Who would replace him if somebody did replace him? Is there anyone that you see there in the parliamentary party that you think could take the big gig at number 10?
As Pav said, it's not like who... or maybe it was... sorry, Keith, who could replace him, but who would want to? You've got so much going on right now. There's inflation or possibly stagflation, and Ukraine and energy, and coming out of... Well, we're out of the pandemic, hopefully, but sort of the aftertaste of pandemic policies. Who wants to take that on? Yeah. I certainly wouldn't.
Who would want to take on that job? Let's just get a final word from all of you as well on train strikes. It looks as if for a few days the country will be crippled. Keith, are you a user of trains, and what do you think about somebody's right to strike? In about 10 seconds, if you can, Keith.
Well, I think the unions must be funded by the petrol companies, because it'll drive everybody to use their cars and spend more money on petrol.
I think you might be right. Fleur, you don't drive a car. Do you use trains?
Very often, and I think when the average nurse's salary is 33,000 and the average train driver's salary is 45,000, I think it's disgusting.
There it is. Pav, do you concur?
Yeah, kind of, but I think he's going to have to use the Thatcherite policy in. He's going to have to isolate the unions the way she did in the early 80s and then try to pick them off one by one. It's all well and good Kwasi Kwarteng talking about legislation, but legislation in itself will probably be seen optically as authoritarian. It needs to be legislation and getting the public on side. And he did it in 2019. It's time for him to do it again.
There it is. Guys, thank you for your time this afternoon. That is Pav. Many of you will know him as Pav in Harrow. He's a barrister by trade. Thank you to him. Fleur Meston, who's a student from Bristol, was our other panellist there, and Keith Grinstead from Suffolk. He works in the food poverty area, campaigning in that department. If you would like to be part of a future People's Question Time, joining us on the programme, get in touch now, 0344 499 1000, and we'll put you on the list, and we'll return to that again soon for another People's Question Time. We're going to go back to your calls as well in a few moments, our big thread of the day. Paul Champlina with us as well in about 15 minutes too. This is Talk TV.
I'm Tom Newton-Dunn, and this is Talk TV. The most memorable moment in my career, without sounding completely conceited, has to be interviewing President Trump in the Oval Office in the White House. Particularly the little red button he had on his desk. I had no idea what it did as the interview went on. I wondered more and more, was he going to launch a nuclear strike on North Korea or open up a shark pit that I'd then fall into? Turned out he pressed it right at the end of the interview, and in walked a butler with a tray carrying a Diet Coke. It was a Diet Coke button.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Zora Suleiman. Some breaking news. There are reports that 2 British men who were captured by Russian forces while fighting in Ukraine have been sentenced to the death penalty. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were detained in April. They're accused of being mercenaries, but their families insist they were in Ukraine's military. The Prime Minister has insisted it's time to stop spending and start cutting taxes. Speaking in Blackpool this afternoon, Boris Johnson urged the public to pull together through the cost of living crisis and said taxes must come down in a sign Brits could get extra help. Well, it comes as the RAC says it is a truly dark day for drivers as the cost of filling an average family car with petrol has exceeded £100 for the first time ever. Well, Boris Johnson also unveiled plans to help low-income families in England get onto the property ladder. He's launched a review into better access to low-deposit mortgages, but the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the plans don't go far enough.
I think the announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today.
And some of the world's top golfers who are playing in the controversial Saudi-backed Live Series have been suspended from the rival PGA Tour with immediate effect. In a statement from Live Golf, they said the decision is vindictive and deepens the divide between the tour and its members. It comes under fire over links to the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia. Well, that's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
It's just gone 3:30 on Talk TV. We're live from the Talk Radio studios. Terry says, ironic that a barrister is comparing the wages of train and nurses when he'll get more per hour or writing a letter than a nurse gets in a week, says Terry. He didn't, actually. It was Fleur, who's a student, that made that point. Just to correct you, Terry. Nice to hear Pav or CPAV. Many of you are making that point too. Thank you. This one in from Chingford John, reference smoking tobacco isn't a dangerous product. It's the additional rubbish that the tobacco companies put in cigarettes that are dangerous, but I guess it all amounts to the same thing, and that is cigarettes. On a related point, Catherine in Cardiff, I shall say what I always say about the war on smoking. What a load of hypocrisy when there is such a movement to legalise marijuana. I smoke neither, so I have no personal axe to grind. It is interesting, isn't it, that most people who will be partaking recreationally or otherwise in marijuana will be doing so with the help of tobacco being added. I know there are other ways to have it, particularly medicinally speaking, as it were. Let's go to Mike in York, reference property and, well, Boris Johnson's big idea. What are you thinking, Mike? Hi.
What a mess.
You're not spotting this as a beauty, then?
Well, this is my job, so I have property and I do it out.
OK.
And the first thing is that people keep referring back to the 1980s. But in the 1980s, lending by building societies, buy-to-let, was a much different proposition than it is today. You've only got to think of Northern Rock. The building societies then, they got the funds from the members. They didn't have high overheads and be paying shareholders simply because it was the members that owned the society. So that's that. So there's no comparison with the 1980s. It is what it is now. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
Buying to let, we can do a cash buy. We don't even need to go to a bank to buy it. We're looking for one now. But the ones that I'm only talking about York now, is every time we've tried to buy a house cash, the estate agents have actually put the property best and final offer. And they've gone for well over their asking price. There was one that we went after, and it was £30,000 over.
So what? So the fact that you're willing to pay cash?
Yes.
Meaning you literally had all the money?
All the money in the bank.
OK. And once they were aware of that, they upped it because they thought, well, that makes you get a mortgage.
Well, there were more than one person buying. So, that's for the estate agent's job, is to go. But from a landlord's point of view, we're looking for a 5% yield.
Yep.
So no matter what, so it's no good buying a house for say 300,000 if you're only going to get £10,000 a year rent. It's not economic. Now the other thing is, unless
of course you can afford to spend the 300,000.
Well, don't forget, it's not only 300,000 because Osborne, bless him, if you're a private landlord like me with less than 15 houses, an unlimited company, we have to pay 3% additional stamp duty.
Yeah.
So
because you're renting, because it's a landlord investment.
Got a second home. Once you've got one property, more than one property, you've got to pay 3% until you get to the 15 houses bit. And then you don't pay the 3%.
Right, so you've got to get there to start with. Listen, I cut in Mike because we have to move on, but thank you. I didn't know that last little fact. Interesting. That's Mike in York, reference landlords and Boris Johnson's latest initiatives. Let's go back to that breaking news. 2 Britons who were captured by Russian forces while fighting in Ukraine have been sentenced to death. A state-owned Russian news agency, RIA, has said. Aidan Aslin, 28, and Sean Pinner, 48, were detained in April before appearing in court in the separatist Donetsk People's Republic, the DPR, as it's now known. The pair are understood to have admitted training in order to carry out terrorist activity. Cormac Smith is former strategic communications advisor to the Ukrainian foreign minister. Cormac, this is deeply disturbing news, and that last sentence that they were thought to have admitted to carrying out acts of terrorism does whiff all manner of suspicion. Afternoon to you.
Ian, good afternoon. Good to see you always. Look, Ian, it's not just concerning, it's absolutely despicable. I mean, this is 2 points I'll make. One, this is a regime that has recently, we know, been scouring the gutters and the sewers of the earth in search for mercenaries to come and fight their own war for them. As opposed to that, President Zelensky went out right at the start of the war and called on men and women of goodwill who were willing to come and fight for Ukraine to do so. And I believe that these 2 British citizens are 2 brave men who have gone out because it was a cause that they believed in. There hasn't been a cause that has drawn a line between good and evil in our world since the war against Hitler in 1939, 1945. My second point I would make, obviously, we would be very skeptical about any admission that they would have made, because we know now about the barbarism and the unspeakable ways that Russia is treating citizens and prisoners of war. So it's very concerning, but it's despicable is the word I would use.
And one would, as if this story isn't bad enough, Cormac, one would assume that under this newly found Russian system in Ukraine, this curious court that has popped up, that a chance of an appeal or any of the things that we would take for granted that would happen in the legal mechanisms of a case such as this probably don't exist.
Absolutely not, Ian. I mean, this war, and I mean, there are those of us like myself who are trying to make people believe this is not just about Ukraine. This is a hybrid war which Russia has been waging on the West for at least the last 8 years, since the illegal annexation of Crimea and the invasion of Donbass and the setting up of the so-called People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. This is no less than a battle between the rules-based order that, the Allies, the Western Allies, established in 1945, and as I think Zelensky said a few weeks ago when he addressed Davos, brute force. And brute force has no interest, brute force and barbarism. That's the choice that we're facing here. So, no, unfortunately, we would have very, very little faith in any appeal system with these Mickey Mouse republics.
Which comes to the question, Cormac, how should Britain and Western allies respond to this? I mean, the options, one would assume, sadly, are very limited.
There is only one option, Ian. We need to, and I'll use my sound bites that I've been using, we need to arm Ukraine to the teeth, and we need to sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. And I've been saying this, since January, but we're still not getting heavy weapons in soon enough and in sufficient quantities to make the difference. Ukraine is having a really tough time both in the south and in the Donbass in the east, where they are outgunned and outnumbered by the Russians. And we really need to get real on sanctions. I said sanction them back to the Stone Age. You know, we're still pumping €1 billion a day into Russia's war machine. And that's really all I can say on it. Those two things, we're still not doing enough, Ian.
Yeah, got it. Cormac, thank you. Cormac Smith, former strategic communications advisor to the Ukrainian foreign minister, and that news that 2 Britons who were captured by Russian forces while fighting in Ukraine have been sentenced to death, according to the state-owned Russian news agency. This is Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner, 128, 148, detained in April before appearing in court. The pair are understood to have admitted training in order to carry out terrorist activities, which you can almost pretty confidently say that they would never have admitted to such a thing in any other circumstances. What is the process from now? What do this peculiar court, remember this is a court acting in another country, how does it enact? What does it do next? What is its status as far as the wider community are concerned? Well, one would assume automatically that would be there is no status or legal standing. That will not matter, of course. And how does Britain and Western allies respond? It's a disturbing story, and as we get more on this, we'll bring it to you here first on Talk TV. We'll continue with your calls and responses as well. Paul Champlina from Landlord Action joining us in a couple of moments. Reference the big Boris Johnson announcement. The right to buy is back. It's got all the bells and whistles of what Thatcher tried 30, 40 years ago. But will it actually work? Details coming next. Interesting one. Where's the United Nations, the peacekeeping force? They had one in Bosnia. It's a good point. Where is the United Nations on the what's happening in Ukraine? It's an interesting point from Charlie, who disagrees with Cormac. But he does say this: why is no one advocating peace talks? It's a good point. I haven't heard... There's never been a point at the White House where Biden's gone, I'd like to invite Mr. Putin to the White House to talk about... Is there some diplomatic international protocol that precludes you from doing that? I'm not suggesting it's a good idea, but because I don't know what the protocol is. But it does, on the face of it, in the face of people being sentenced to death, for goodness sake, in the face of people being slaughtered, folk fleeing their country in their millions, you might think that at least one person would have gone, maybe we need to sit around and talk about this. Perhaps. 0344 499 1000. Of course, the big thread this afternoon is the Prime Minister. He's announced that lower-paid workers will be able to use their housing benefit to buy their homes and pay their mortgages. Boris Johnson has argued that it makes more sense to spend 30 billion quid that goes on rent to help first-time buyers instead. Labour says he's not thought this through, and they would make the housing crisis worse. Is that true? And somebody did make the point earlier that nobody on a lower wage expects to buy a house. You assume that will happen as you improve your income. Paul Champliner is the founder of Landlord Action, good friend of this show as well. Paul, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian. I've just come off the M25 at a snail pace to try and get some Wi-Fi, but I thought I'd participate in the programme when I heard the call about the Prime Minister doing Michael Gove this morning with Julia and not answering 7 times the request of stats that he knew of benefit tenants that had £16,000 savings will be able to buy a housing association property.
Yeah, so that would be the requirement, right? You need 16 grand as a deposit.
Well, yeah, supposedly. I mean, obviously, the disparity now, if you think about the right to buy, where, you hear the clips from Margaret Thatcher, which they were giving a third off the value. And now it's completely different. Obviously, no one's talked about what discounts are being given. There's been no noise that's come from the housing association. There are a lot of your callers make total sense in the sense that, yes, it's okay, one thing getting a mortgage. Obviously, trying to have a deposit at a discounted rate is going to be a challenge sometimes. And then, of course, there's all the associated costs with running a property as well. The leasehold, the freehold, the upkeep of a property, the insurances. I mean, that's a big challenge itself. And then, of course, you have the debacle and the problems that you have with universal credit. And that people struggling with, obviously, people struggling with, of course, with the living costs.
Yeah. And as somebody just said, Paul, I mean, if you are on a low income, I mean, previously, and this has happened to every generation, this is not just some new thing now, but if you're on a low income, you tend not to expect to be able to physically buy a property. You often wait until your situation's improved, right?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's really hard because, of course, what's happening with the private rental sector, rents have gone through the roof. They're unprecedented on how much they're costing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the numbers, I think there's 1.6 million council properties, 0.4 million housing association properties. The sector now is I think it's 15%. The private rental sector is 21%.
Yeah.
Of course, I think it will only be a small minority of numbers that would be able to qualify. People that maybe are working, have actually got some sort of savings. I just it's a starter, to be honest, and I think obviously a lot of it has been done to the timing of what's happening with obviously and literally Portsmouth.
I think so. Listen, Paul, your line, sadly, has literally died on us at that point. We gave it a good go, but I think some real salient information there. Thank you, Paul. Paul Champliner, founder of Landlord Action, with us on Talk TV. Thank you to him. If you've got to have £16,000 saving, you do wonder, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but if somebody is on housing benefit, are they likely... It's not impossible, but are they likely to have 16 grand sitting in the bank somewhere? I think probably not. 10 to 4, let's go to Gavin in Chelmsford. What have you got for us, Gavin? Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Hi.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that
I'm getting suspicious that no one wants to actually sort the housing crisis out, and that includes Labour, because if you think of farming land, it sells for about £10,000 an acre, but when they give it planning permission, it's something like 10 times that.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It's crazy, isn't it?
So there's a lot of farmers who would like to sell some land, but they can't get the planning permission. So just say, for example, the government said, right, we're going to take the edges off a lot of your land, but you can only sell it for, we're going to give it planning permission, but you can only sell it for 20,000 instead of 100.
Yeah.
All right? So they release a lot of land, the farmers make some money, not the bunch they was expecting, but a decent amount. But coupled with that, this sort of ties in with Kevin's point about people wanting everything for nothing. You could have a self-build scheme. So I've seen these situations where you have like a whole road, you've got something like, I don't know, 20, 30 people all together, and they build a whole road of houses. They help each other with their houses and that. So they build their own house. So the biggest cost of building a house is the land. So first of all, you're taking that away, and then you're contributing towards the building of it, even if it's digging holes or putting posts in or something. Of course. So you're probably going to get a house for, I don't know, 30, 40% of the original cost. Obviously, you won't be able to sell it for a profit. There have to be some proviso there. But it seems to me that someone like Keir Starmer could come out with something like this, and he could wash away the Tories straight away.
Yeah, he'd be picking the curtains for number 10, wouldn't he, if he could come up with something. And also, and I say this not to be clever, but if you look online, you can buy a prefab house for about 30 grand.
That's right, yeah.
And you think, OK, it's not a house you're going to live in for the whole of your life. You're not going to have a family of 4 living in there. But, these are pretty good places. They're obviously sold to certain standards, and they would need to be. And I know that you have to consider water, and you have to consider if you're going to start building 500 houses, is there a road for those houses to use, and what about doctor surgeries and shops? And I know there's more to it than just going on eBay and buying a house.
You've got to do that whether you self-build or whether you don't. So
correct.
Sort of incidental costs.
Absolutely, that's spot on.
Yeah.
So why aren't we exploring, different ways of living?
Keir Starmer putting this out and everyone's saying, bloody hell, that's a good idea.
Somebody a few years ago, Gavin, and this is absolutely true, and he wasn't larking around. He called us up and he said, why don't we start building houses underground? I thought he was sort of like Teletubby stuff. I thought he was bonkers at first, and he kind of expanded on the point. And there are places around the world, and obviously probably somewhere on one of those Channel 4 programmes where they've done it. But it kind of made sense, because there's a lot of ground underground.
Well, yeah, obviously, but I mean, it costs a lot more to go underground, doesn't it? I think, but even so, I mean, you see what profit as farmers near me who've made. Yeah. They've sold arable land that cost £10,000, or they could sell for 10,000. They're selling it for over 100.
Yeah,
and they get planning permission. Why couldn't there could be some deal with that?
You would think so. It's a great point to finish on, Gavin. Thank you for that. That's Gavin in Chelmsford with us here on Talk TV. That is it from us. But coming up on the other side of the news at 4, Jeremy Kyle is here.
Shocking, this news, isn't it?
Very.
I mean, where does that genuinely leave the United Kingdom?
What is the response? I mean, how do you respond to something like this? I mean, is there any kind of national...
2 English nationals in the Ukrainian army, but English nationals.
Yeah.
What does that say? I mean, that's a game changer is the wrong phrase. Well,
it's up there, isn't it?
This could have a massive impact on... It's quite interesting. We were talking about the show earlier, and one of the things that I've said every single day is I would hate to think that because of whatever's going on in the world, in our world, that what happens in Ukraine becomes a sort of, it's day 111.
Yeah.
There's more people. It should never become like that, because it's appalling. But actually, this is going to put it front and centre again, quite rightly.
Correct.
I mean, this morning I went to put some petrol in. How bad's that? I mean, honestly, how 100 quid it is now to fill a normal family car.
It's beyond
so it's probably 200 quid in your Ferrari, isn't it?
And that just gets me to the end of the road. Just gets me to your place.
You've heard that joke, haven't you? The man who went to pump 1 and put in a tenner, where was he going? Pump 4.
Yeah.
So it's just about it. That's all it is. But yeah, no, listen, loads to talk about today. Loads and loads and loads, and we'll be delighted. Are you on the talk tonight?
No, tomorrow.
Were you on tonight? Last night?
No.
No.
Tuesdays and Fridays.
Taking it easy.
Yeah.
Friday night's the big gig. Is it? They won't let me on a Friday.
Is that right?
It's the Ian Collins big night.
Is that what it is?
Welcome to the big show, Collins.
The big show, yeah.
Yeah, we've been rushing around with this latest bit of news, so I don't even have stuff on me, but we are going to absolutely talk about this breaking news that 2 English nationals serving in the Ukrainian army have been sentenced to death. That's a big thing.
Yeah, by a court which internationally would be illegal because it exists in another country.
The Donbass People's Republic Court, part of the Russian rebellion, rebels. Yeah. And I'm going to say something that's not going to go down very well.
Go on.
Every single time Boris Johnson wants a major distraction, he gets one.